Hello, my friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and welcome to the Astrology of November 2021. I am joined by my good friend, Hawk Grubb. How are you doing today, Hawk?
Pretty well. Excited to be here. Stoked to get to have this chat with you.
Yeah, we're going on a journey here today with the Astrology of November, which is prolific, I would say. There's a lot of
Journey
things going
through
on.
Scorpio.
Right, we're going to go into the tunnels of Scorpio and see if we can come out on the other Sagittarian side here. I'm looking at the chat box here, and we've got a lot of people that are joining us from various corners of the world. So if you are with us today, let us know in this chat box. I'm seeing Gabe is here from New Jersey. Hello, my friend Gabe. Tarya
Hey,
is here from
Gabe.
Finland. Remco stopping in from the Netherlands. Azur is here from France. Abraham, hello from Montreal. Jody's checking in from Florida. Cheryl from Washington. Othelia is here. Thank you all for stopping by. It's very exciting to see all of you here. It's always fun to be joined with people. So if you have questions for me or Hawk throughout the day, put them in the chat box and we'll try to get to them as much as we can. We've got a lot of ground to cover today. So hopefully we'll be able to get through that. So if I don't get to every single thing in the chat, it's mostly because we'll be here for 4 hours. I do. But we're probably going to be hanging out with you for at least a couple hours. So yeah, get some snacks and we'll roll on through it. So
We may also
Hawk,
get some snacks.
yeah, right. We may too. I've got something here so I don't pass out from low blood sugar. So Hawk, tell me a little bit more about your journey. You're a fellow Nightlight Astrology alumni, and you've been doing some interesting things with astrology and divination. So let our audience know a little bit about you.
Yeah. So I came to astrology through Western occultism. Like I started a magical practice when I was like maybe 20 and just learned astrology out of necessity and then got like completely rabbit holed into it when I met Achyuta Bhavadas, our shared teacher.
Yeah.
Totally went deep on traditional astrology. And now I'm kind of like unifying those two things to the best of my ability. It's like kind of come back around to my magical practice now. So I've become like kind of like a magician or like an astrologer for magicians.
Nice.
And which is really, really fun. I love those. I love that about my existence right now. Yeah, I do a lot of devotional work with deities. You'll probably hear me bring up that at least once over the course of this conversation.
Yeah, and you work with fixed stars too, right?
A little bit, not as deeply as I would like a non-stellar deity, but I mess with like Ross Alhaig and Regulus, and those are my two
I believe
friends right
when we
now.
started today, Ross Algethi was on the ascendant at about 16 Sagittarius, where I'm at here in the Midwest. So we have Venus on the ascendant here in Michigan, which is the Hercules star. So like the kneeling one, right?
Right.
So we'll get into some of that today as well. But any interesting talismanic type works that you've been excited about or things coming up?
Um, Basically all I'm doing right now is I'm gradually launching my like long-term client containers, which I think are going to look like a cool space to like talk about, to move through having your own magical practice, like while getting like one-on-one time with me. Hopefully there's going to be some kind of like group component where you can have some like
Nice.
nice lunar community on top of the like solar, we're going on a magical journey vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the unity of those two things in my practice is like really emphasized. So
You're pretty active on Twitter, right? So people
yes,
can
I
follow you on
literally
Twitter.
never stop talking on Twitter. I'm at Hawkstrology,
Nice.
HAWKSTROLOGY.
And there's a link to be able to find Hawk's website as well. This is student of
The
something. What is it?
stars dot
Student of the stars.
wordpress.com. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
You
So
can also
student of
do
the stars.
bit.ly, like bit.ly/astrohawk will get you there
Okay.
too.
Very cool. Very
It's a little
cool. So
shorter.
so check out Hawk's offerings. Do you have a newsletter that people can sign up for?
I do. I have a mailing list.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I have a mailing list
So
on
then
Patreon. That's fun too.
oh, there you go. So you can support Hawk. You can get signed up for future offerings and future classes, and yeah, spread the love. So I also have something coming up for those of you as we get all of our shameless self plugs out of the way in the beginning here. Um,
Gotta do
I have
it.
a Decans of Scorpio webinar coming up on the 13th of November at 1 p.m., which is a Saturday, and we're going to do a real deep dive into Scorpio. Some of the things I'm going to talk about today, but we're going to go even more in depth into that at that time, and you can find a link to that in the description of this video too. I'm offering an early bird special until the 1st of November, until Samhain, okay, the Celtic cross holiday. For 20% off, you can use the code Scorpio20. So make sure you take advantage of that and sign up for the newsletter if you want updates. I also have a mailing list, Spencer Michaud Astrology. All right. I think we've gotten all that out of the way. Yeah, it's fun. It's been a lot of fun. It's really been giving me a whole new perspective on, not just the decans, but the signs themselves and a lot of the mythology associated with all of the different sign placements and things of that nature. I've been leaning really heavily on Liz Green's work and Austin Coppock and T. Susan Chang and all these great authors. There's a lot of great resources out there, and I hope to consolidate it and maybe distill it into something for people to be able to learn from. So
it sounds like a really fun download to get all at once.
Yeah. So I'm seeing we've got some Ross L. Haig and Ross L. Gethy fans in the chat here.
Some Ross L. Haig stands.
so very cool. So Hawk, we have a lot to get to here today. Any initial thoughts on the month, like big picture, 30,000 foot viewpoints that we might be able to introduce the month with?
Oh gosh. I have just been getting this big like gestational theme from all these planets moving slowly through Scorpio. It feels really like something is a brewing in the womb, basically, of the world. And I know that you and I talked about this sort of like purification vibe at the end of it. So it feels like almost something is like going to break out over the course of the month. But first it has to like go like super deep into this like chthonic realm, right? Where it reconstitutes itself and is broken down. So I think that feels like the picture of the journey.
Yeah, for sure. In doing some of my initial Scorpio research, I had to really get in touch with kind of the decomposition process and like the death process, which was a little gnarly. I mean, I have a Taurus moon, so I'm in a Cancer sun, so I'm more of a summer baby than a fall one. So it's always a little shocking for me to go into those, chthonic realms as you were speaking of.
But like you'd like it to be alive, ideally.
Right, exactly. But I think that I'm coming to terms with death more as I get older and stare it down in the face and try to, go through these revolutions that we have to go through year after year, and seeing it as part of that regenerative cycle. And I think with Scorpio, there's really, as I went in this deep dive of literally these really grotesque, like, fermentation processes of a body or of plants or things like that, you could really see that there was some really beautiful synchronizations with the Scorpio decans too. We see this journey from Scorpio 1 where Austin Coppock talks about hunger and desire in that decan. And we see this 5 of Cups card, right? Where we see a figure that is, mourning. Yeah, it's a sad card. He's mourning the loss of form. And, one of the things that we think about here is we're moving into Mars's domain. And some meditations I've had on Mars's role in Scorpio is, instead of the Mars and Aries where we are severing and separating to be able to individuate from the collective and then eventually fuse into a body and then subsequently grow. Yes. The Scorpionic Mars is different. It's separating the body from the spirit to be able to release essence again, back to collective, or back to like prime materia, I guess you'd say, that will feed future growth, right? Does that make
Oh,
sense?
that's such an interesting distinction when you think about the fire active element versus the water receptive, because this is such a big thing I've been like meditating on recently, is like what in our cultural mythos, right? There's not a lot of room for receptive Mars. I feel like all of our Martian archetypes have been compressed into Aries, and it's Aries in manifestations. So I
Yeah.
really like that distinction, that it's about the severing function that occurs in Scorpio is about release.
Yeah.
And like I'm picturing liquid like seeping into the ground, right?
Perfect.
Like to water it. It's really cool.
Yeah, and you know, I was trying to connect that, like, I had to do some really gruesome like research the last few days, where I came across this really, like, they did this study with like a pig or something, like a dead pig, and they showed various stages of decomposition. It was pretty rough. But one interesting thing though is that first decan, you know, Austin Coppock calls hunger, and the jawbone, right?
Right.
And in the first stages of death, you see the bacteria that is normally housed within the stomach or the intestines is now released into the rest of the body to start to consume the body, whereas a living being would contain it in that digestive system. So I thought that that was really fascinating to see that that's like, you could see that could be kind of the hunger that Austin might be talking about if we bring it
Yeah.
into a natural process. And then you move into the second decan, where he talks about these circuits of exchange, right? The mutual distillation. Well, one funny thing scientifically is that these bacteria give off gases
Right.
that attract flies. So there is this attraction where then you have the furthering of that decomposition process, right? There's this bonding that happens, this coming together that happens to accelerate the process of separating the body back to the earth. And then finally, you have that putrefaction phase where all of the flesh and fluids have been consumed, and you have like this husk that's left, like the hair and the bones and things like that. And it's just a ghost in a shell. And it finally returns to that prime matter. And, you know, the third decan of Scorpio has this, you know, 7 of Cups type of thing. We move from 5 of Cups to 6 of Cups to 7 of Cups, where we're nostalgic as well for the past relationship or the past form that we have to revisit to be able to, like, I don't know, distill the essence from it and then
Yeah.
finally release. And Austin talks about temptation in that 7 of Cups card, where if we chase the old ghosts, we're going to, you know, find suffering. We have to, that's when we need to return it to the earth.
Yeah. The way that the Thoth deck illustrates this is the card is called debauch. And it's disgusting. It's like 7 cups. There's like all this like putrefaction imagery. And it's like the flow of water is the motif that carries itself through the cup suit in the Thoth deck. And in the 7, it's like just these cups holding old water, and there's no rain on the horizon. It's just kind of like dark. It's a totally still ocean. So it's like no new life is like flowing through the system. We're just like holding the old water.
Yeah. Oh. And it's so poignant because I think that, you know, one of the lessons that Austin talks a lot about is not chasing an old ghost or an old
Yes.
shell of something. And that's when we get into that debauchery that you were talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Is right when we're chasing something that no longer has vitality left in it. And if we kept hanging, think about this like as like hoarder. But if you keep holding on to all this old stuff, you know,
Long past its point of utility.
right, new energy or new chi can't flow through your space. And the necessity of Mars says, you know, this is me getting in touch with the malefics and saying, oh, there is maybe some benefit to this because they have a function, right?
Especially with dignified Mars in this month. Like, it's like we're going to see him in his most royal manifestation.
Right. Mars and Scorpio, you know, Mars, pure Mars, right? We think about some of these signs I like to think of some of the signs' essence as combination of domicile and exaltation lord sometimes, like Aries, Mars is combined with the sun to be able to be a point of consciousness, selection, awareness. But this is pure Mars, where it's just severing, separating, returning to the earth, getting like, this cutting and slashing of body from spirit.
Yeah.
But
it's so
interesting.
subtle too, because it's like water. So this is like, it's like that overt slashing and cutting feels so like, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. Like, what's the opposite of rarefied? It's not like brought to a point the same way that it is when it's Aries. Like Aries is like the spear, like flying through the air, but like cutting through water, right? Like that's a vibe. I think we're gonna like, probably explore like that little. I don't have like a nice bit for that because it's so like. I wanted to jump back to something you said in the first decan of Scorpio, which is the decan that like I suppose we'll approach first. So I may as well come back to it. The dissolution of boundaries that you describe is like the first process of putrefaction, right? When the previously housed little bacteria colony like decides to transgress the boundaries, right, of its container. I was thinking about that as like a diode with Venus, right? Because like Taurus, right, I always think of as the mycelium network, like Venus and Taurus. So that's like, and as like the network that runs nutrients through soil, right? So it's like the life-bringing network. And then in Scorpio, it's like it's kind of going the opposite direction. You know what I mean? Where it's like, it's the exact same functionality, but in like a dissolution capacity. I thought that was like I thought of that like as you were talking, I was like,
it's perfect, right? And you can think of also, just piggybacking off what you say, there's the microbes in the soil are getting heated up at both of these periods of time, but they're heating for I guess fructification in the Taurus season, like fertile.
It's a great word for it.
Right. That's Austin Kopic's favorite word. So I can't claim like ownership of it. I learned that from him. But here it's fermentation. So it's a similar thing, but like you said, to be able to like move outward and
fermentation is a great word for it because of the liquid medium.
Entropy, right?
Some people in the chat, Azur said pervasive as like a way for receptive Mars to have like a difference, and Abraham says diffused, which I kind of like I like diffused because it's like a diffusion across barriers, right?
Yeah. Well, we're got someone mentioning mushrooms too. So like you were saying, the mycelium networks, are agents of decomposition as well, like being able to come together to break down the old matter. And we're going over this, I think, in depth in the beginning here, because what I like to do is paint all of the big picture topics in decanic context, solar decanic context. So I believe that the decans that we explore with the sun are just a point of awareness that we have as a collective, that maybe the spirit of this time, what is fusing meaning into this time. And then a lot of the other planets are, the moon is bringing it into form as a body or taking it out of form. The moon has those dual kind of significations, and the other planets have other roles in that. But I really do feel like the solar decanic journey is really important to kind of give us a little bit of background with that.
And you're great at the specific thing, I think.
Thank you. Yeah. And we're going to start off with 1 day in Scorpio 1, but then we're going to begin the month pretty much in Scorpio 2. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get to that. We will get to Sagittarius 1 as well. And maybe we have some big picture thoughts about the transition from Scorpio to Sagittarius before we get into the daily minutia of all this. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's where that, I'm like imagining, like, how like when some babies are born, there's like the cowl over their face. Like I'm kind of imagining that as like the kind of like that we're busting out of the cowl, like that's been like, or all of this processing has been done inside this container. I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say something about Venus and Capricorn, but I want to make sure that you talk about what you were about to talk about first, because it's totally
removing the veil, right? Removing the the shell, I would say, to reveal light, to reveal essence, to reveal new born passion, I think, is another thing we could think about that. Like you were talking about some of the stages of alchemy, right? And Scorpio we can think of as like that nigredo phase, right? Or you were talking about the putrefaction, the blackening. Jung talks about embracing the shadow energy around this. But, Susan Chang was talking about this nigredo for Scorpio as well. And she was talking about the body rots to reveal the inner light. And I think
the hollowing, right?
Exactly. So once we get to that Sagittarius stage, it's just there's movement. Sagittarius 1 is all about that eight of wands, where it's like, all right, we've been freed of all these past, ghosts, these past forms that have outlived their efficacy and don't have vitality anymore. Now we're ready to find a new goal. We're ready to infuse into a new belief, a new passion. That decan especially is about enthusiasm. There's a spirit associated with Sagittarius 1 called Loimos, and Loimos was the daimon of plagues. So there's like this contagious type of thing. So, but you could think about enthusiasm as the ultimate.
Right, laughter is contagious. That's like
exactly.
a nice Jupiter contagion question.
Right. So it's like kind of this spread of whatever it is that we've revealed through this fermentation process. And we're going to see some really interesting connections with the South Node coming up around that period of time, too, at the end of the month. We've got a Mercury Cazimi that's going to be happening at the end of the month. A few other things, just like broad picture stuff. We've got 2 lunations, the new moon on the 4th in Scorpio 2, the full moon lunar eclipse in Sun is in Scorpio 3, the moon is in Taurus 3, right on Algol, right? A few ingresses. The 5th, we have Venus moving into Capricorn, Mercury into Scorpio. 21st, the sun moves into Sagittarius. November 24th, Mercury moves into Sag as well. And then there's a couple things that I like to, and we'll get to these things individually, but solar phases, right? On the 3rd, Mercury moves under the sun's beams again in what's called its morning set. And then on the 22nd, I think this is a really important one that we should spend some time on, is Mars makes what's called its heliacal rise. It comes out of the beams of the sun and is visible again at 15 degrees Scorpio, which is a really powerful place for it.
Yeah, it's that cross-quarter spot.
For sure. And this is something that I think we're going to see some really important, communal things happening and personal things happening around that period of time, because Mars is going to be so concentrated in its energy as it becomes visible. And think back to the Mars Cazimi that happened, earlier in October, I think it was, for significations that are coming to light. So we'll get to that, but we've got an animal spirit. The swordfish was the symbol for the month, which is perfect because it moves through water. I
didn't want to give it away when I was like, what's an example of like cutting through water? And I was like, oh, we have one.
It was so perfect. I always pull this kind of animal to be a guide. And swordfish is like, okay, yeah, you've literally got a sword, Mars, cutting through water at great speeds. So that was pretty interesting.
It felt really corrective to my perception too, like when you pulled that, because we had people in the chat saying diffusion as an example. And I really think about things that happen through water as diffuse, but that's because I'm an air land person. You know what I mean? But like things that exist in the context of water, it's not fucking diffusing for them at all. Like that's exactly that's their menstruum, it's their medium. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and Mars also signifies pursuit. It is like an arrow sometimes, and we may be pursuing through these scorpionic themes, things that may or may not be good for us. Like, I think that's something I've really had to come to terms with, is I think the ultimate goal in Scorpio, just from like a psychological point of view, is maybe potentially releasing either bad habits or old, outdated forms. And sometimes we want those things really badly and we desire them, but they may not, we may be pursuing something that's just a husk or a shell, right? And
There
that's where
certainly
we get
is a
into.
sloughing off of the carapace that I feel like Scorpio does magnificently. And especially people
Yeah.
with Scorpio placements, I feel like have an eagle eye on the places where those exist. Like Aquarius
Yeah.
has this thing too, with it, but they're just like, oop, that's an old kingdom thing. Like
Totally.
that should probably go. Like I feel like I know a lot of Scorpios who just like have that like embodied in them. And with the square to Saturn, I think that really, like with that whole
Yeah.
Scorpio stellium overcoming the square to Saturn, I feel like we're gonna see some of that like fiery Scorpio-ness like pushing against the
Mm.
Saturnine structures and being like, which ones of these can we like?
Yeah, that's a great point, Hawk. It is that's one of the biggest kind of aspectual relationships that we're going to be experiencing in November is when all this stuff starts ingressing into Scorpio. It's going to immediately make what you were terming an overcoming square to the planets in Aquarius, especially Saturn. And we'll see that when we look at the chart. But why don't we do
and
this?
Jupiter too, to your point about it being like
Right,
overcoming like maybe like pleasures that have outstayed their welcome, right?
right.
It's not
Yeah, and
just about
I
like
see this.
old guard systems.
Well, and I see this as a little bit of a foot on the gas, foot on the brake type of thing too, where I think
Yeah,
there's going to be
totally.
I think we're going to get some frustration that's going to
That makes
bubble
a lot of
over a
sense to
little
me.
bit because we want things, but the greater, I guess,
That we
the
do.
greater whole. Yeah, like I know for me, I'm pretty tired of like pandemic. Like
God, hard same.
I'm really sick of it, and I've been very very cautious about how I've
Me
gone
too.
about my business, and pretty much still living as a hermit throughout this whole thing. And
Same.
I'm kind of getting like antsy, like,
Hard same.
but I
I'm
know that
getting fatigued.
fatigue, yeah, yeah, just like exile fatigue.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
and even for like a 12th house sun such as myself, it's like, okay, like I need some variety or novelty every once in a while, right?
I'm
So
like, I have too many Leo placements for this, TBH. I need this to be over. Did you
right,
see
right, we gotta.
actually Kira, the astrology, shared this image with me that was like the number of inoculations for the COVID vaccine per sign, and Leo was right at the top. And
Yeah, because they're like, let me get back to let me get back to business. Let me get back
I
to the
need to be
party.
seen.
Right.
I
So
don't
yeah,
do
that's
all this for nothing.
yeah, it's yeah. So I think that there may be some definite frustration with that because I think most of the collective is like, hey, when are we going to return to some kind of sociability or be able to pursue some of the things that we've been really patient about. Many of us have delayed gratification for a long period of time that
That
Saturn's
delayed
been asking us to
gratification is
do.
a great term.
Yeah. I don't think we're quite over the hump yet though, is that's to me what this square is going to be saying is that
I don't
there's
think so
still some
either.
challenges and that's going to be rough and we may have to come to terms with that. So that may be another big picture kind of thing to keep in
Totally.
mind.
Yeah, because the
And
Scorpio galvanization, right, is going to be like pouring a little bit of gas on
yeah,
that.
totally.
Kira notes that Scorpio was, of course, at the bottom of the list, and that it was actually just for one county in Utah.
Oh, nice. Is this Kira of the Astrology podcast here? Very
Yep.
cool. Welcome, Kira.
They're
Thank you
there
for stopping
anytime.
by today. Yeah, are you seeing anything else in the chat here? So we've got Cheryl's talking about Mars and Scorpio cutting through water, through old dead stuff. Definitely.
I liked Jason's thing about inoculation. I thought that was just dead on as like a receptive, as like a the type of penetration that yields a water thing right into the menstruum, right? Because it's like I'm so picturing those like syringes that like inject mushroom spores
Right.
into their menstruum. I'm gonna say the word menstruum so many times. I'm so sorry. It's like
It's all right.
Mars is like it's just gonna happen. Yeah, so I loved that. I thought that was really cool. And then that burst into Sagittarius after that process of inoculation and like
Mhm.
mushroom eatery is going to be the like what was all that for, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. Help us to find meaning again.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Like what was all that for?
because I think that don't think we would be being responsible if we didn't talk about that there is some pain and suffering with the death process, right? And there probably is some grief that comes along with it. But
Totally.
but learning that suffering and grief can have purpose and that the dawn can come after the dark night of the soul, I think is something that can help us go through that process willingly rather than resistantly. I think that's the key. My favorite phrase on this channel is, you can't avoid pain in your life, but you can choose to suffer or not by either accepting what is happening in your life or resisting it. And I think that this is something that, especially with Scorpio 3, is by resisting the necessity to let go, that's when you can create the debauch. That's when you can get, sucked into like things like addiction, things like being overwhelmed by the past and things like that. So going with the flow, letting things return to the earth, I think is really part of an important phase. And then the light will come. It will come back, right?
Yeah. I like Scorpio for its ability to stay with it. I think that like the Scorpions that I know, like they don't turn away from like their suffering friend, for example,
Right.
because that's like unpleasant or difficult to look at. It's not just like being a Martian doesn't just mean that like Mars things are happening to you, right? It means that you're also able to like pilot yourself inside Mars situations in a way that feels like you're walking in a space that's not as just like, oh my gosh, like this experience you were describing being a Taurus moon, like having to deal with some like scorpionic topics. So I feel like they have this like amazing capacity. Just I want to give the Scorpios like, it's just something that's like that I think is really great about you guys. While we talk about all of this, like you guys can like hold and witness and like just be such awesome containers for people who are experiencing the naturally malefic side of life. And it's like there's like a nurturance that happens there that maybe is not Cancerian specifically. You know what I mean? It's not about holding and nourishing. It's about being like, I'm witnessing you, like I witness what you're experiencing and going through.
Well, it's courageous, right? It's the courage of that warrior Mars being able to say,
that receptive Mars, like I will
right.
witness this. I always use that word, the witness, for Scorpio.
And I think every sign, every archetype has a function within the circular round of time and of nature. And like you said, being able to witness and hold space for maybe some of the difficult, sewer tunnels that we have to go through in life sometimes, is very valuable. And that can be very healing, right? That can be
exactly. It's very healing.
All right. Well, should we dive into the charts here? I think we got a big picture here. I don't know if anyone has any questions out there. But I'm going to share my screen and we'll take a look at the chart and start going through kind of the daily experience here. One other thing I wanted to mention is that Venus does start out the month out of bounds, and then Mercury will be moving out of bounds by the beginning of December, But that's sort of like an interesting place for Venus too, because Venus is sort of outside of the realm of the solar king. It's a little bit of a pure experience of Venus, right?
Yeah.
You have any thoughts about out of bounds planets?
I have, they're like beholden to no one. That's like my key phrase, but that's, I think you might be better suited to answer that question. And then once you have, I think that's definitely worth talking about. And I'd actually love to hear what you think. And then after that, I kind of want to jump in about Venus's ingress to Cap, as that starts.
I think just mostly it's Venus, when it's out of bounds, or any planet out of bounds, is more a pure expression of its own essence, and it doesn't have to follow any rules that the solar quote unquote king would give it. And we're just using like Hellenistic sort of terminology with that.
Yes, I'm totally with this.
So, and I think that can be for better or for worse. Like here's two examples I have for a Venus out of bounds. A positive example would be someone like Bjork, who is just creating whatever she wants to create, is very unique and is very idiosyncratic about their artwork, right?
It's a great example.
Yeah, and it's just like she just has this like essence about her that's just continually pushing the boundaries, the limits. She doesn't give a rat's ass what people think, which is very cool, and has created some really interesting forms of art through that. Now, maybe a more negative side of this is someone like Drake, who has Venus in Scorpio out of bounds, who is continually grooming young actresses to eventually date them when they become of age. So he doesn't respect like the social boundaries that are accepted within, Venusian types of relationships. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, that does make sense.
Right. So there's two different expressions of this, of how like there might be an interesting artist, or like someone who is just kind of, I don't know.
So like what you're saying is there's two ways basically to violate the collective contractual agreements that we're all under.
Yes. Yes. And some of them can be positive and some can be, definitely frowned upon and negative and a little bit underhanded in that regard.
Yeah,
You
like
could
something
also
that we
think about,
actually collectively agree that is wrong, not for an
yeah,
arbitrary reason, like
right.
artistic conventions, but for a really good reason.
Right. Yeah. Like, and even if we move past like Drake's example, you could see like, different people coming together that wouldn't normally come together. So I guess from a practical perspective, I would say be careful about relationships that you get into with Venus out of bounds, because when Venus goes back into bounds, you may be like, what was I thinking? This is not what
Yeah,
I
like
would
you
normally
reapply
do.
the context.
Right. Because we
I have
are going
one
to have
I
a,
have actually I have a Drake
yeah,
one actually that's
yeah.
less distressing, but like of him, but like he's constantly if you think about the collective's response to his artistic persona, he's just like constantly getting dunked on nonstop, like on Twitter, Instagram, like the collective is just like loves clowning on Drake. So like
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the difference in the way that people respond to Bjork versus him and their like ways of going out of bounds. I don't know.
I'm not sure where her Venus actually is by sign. Um, I didn't look up her chart as far as like that sign placement, but I wonder if Drake's Venus is retrograde as well. Because one of the things that I've seen also, because we have a Venus retrograde coming up at the end of the year, is there's a repellent quality to Venus retrograde. Venus is not, you know, using her normal powers of attraction. It's almost like this, like pushing away type of thing, like the opposite pole of a magnet. And I've seen that come up in some client charts too, with their experiences. Okay, so that
Yeah.
was just one other note. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that like folks who are like newer to astrology don't take this to mean that you're gonna repel like people if you have Venus retrograde in your chart, because like it's a whole nuanced, complex like thing.
Yeah. All right, so let's dive into the nitty gritty here. I hope everyone's doing okay out there. I'm seeing some really great comments here in the chat. Thank you so much for participating here today. I'm really
I'm laughing
excited
at
to have
Dusty's
all of you.
comment.
Drake
100%
100%
comes. Go ahead.
as a clown and is treated accordingly. Yeah, he is a little bit of a clown. For sure. Okay, Abraham says Bjork has Venus in Capricorn, so that actually works well with your Venus and Capricorn stuff we're going to be talking about. So,
Oh yeah.
but let's start out with the first of the month here, and we'll go in chronological order. So we're talking about Monday, November 1st. And we're starting off in the balsamic phase of the moon, so tying up some loose ends, releasing some things at the beginning of the month. It is also associated with a cross holiday, which I believe is pronounced correctly Samhain, spelled Samhain, a festival of the dead or a liminal space. Do you have some thoughts on Samhain?
I do. I think that most of our understanding of what Samhain is sort of like a syncretic combination of, and like folks can jump in if I'm not correct about this, but this is the understanding I've gathered, is that it's a syncretization of Catholic Day of the Dead or Catholic All Souls Day rites, which falls on November 1st. So that's where you get this connection to in Europe anyway. This is like where you get this connection to like talking about like you're like the dead basically, because it's like you can like hit up the saints to like intercess for whatever. It's like that's the veil is thin, that almost that it's like almost like just like Christian basically in origin, I haven't seen a ton of evidence for the idea that like it's like an ancient Celtic like cross quarter, right? For anything aside from it just being like a bonfire night, essentially. And my take on that bonfire thing, I actually love the imagery of this. So like the equinoxes, right, are the moments in time where the scales tip in the direction of either Saturn or the sun, right? So when the sun crosses the fall equinox, we're tipping into the realm of Saturn. The equal division of daylight slips into the realm of the night, right? And so, but it doesn't quite feel like that yet, right? In the beginning of Libra season, we're still very much like being heated up by the remnants of Virgo and the peak solar power, right? Because we're still very much half and half. And then Scorpio season, right? 15 degrees Scorpio to be exact, that's the precise cross quarter. So we have like 0 Cancer, 0 Capricorn, 0 Libra, 0 Aries, right? As the main points on our compass. But then these actual cross quarters happen at 15 degrees of the fixed signs. So what's happening there is we've reached the interstitial point between the fall, right? The fall equinox and the winter solstice. Yes. So it's and I feel like it's a great time to have a fucking bonfire, right? Because you're it's like we're all on like this part of a roller coaster, right? You know, when they have that drop and then there's like the actual drop, like that's where we're at when we come to that moment of Scorpio season where it's like, oh, we're gonna go deep. Like it's nice to like, I love our current secular traditions around it where we all dress up as terrifying things and just like get drunk and like party and like have a celebration together. Cause it's like we're all like reaching out our hand and being like, I accept, like the darkness is coming, like, and it's not so bad. Like actually it's kind of chill. Like we're all friends.
Yeah, some interesting additions is, so you were right, bonfires, dancing and feasting to honor ancestors. You know, you were talking about the veil being the thinnest and that liminal space. They would actually open up, I don't know if it was actually like they open up a grave site, but they had like these mausoleums that you could enter and like visit with your ancestors or something like that. So threshold, you know, and you would honor the spirits. There was something around this period of time called mumming and guising, which is basically the primordial Halloween where you'd dress up and you'd go door to door begging for food to be able to offer to the spirits of your ancestors, and you know, also as an offering so that your livestock would make it through the winter. So you didn't want to piss off any angry ghosts, and you wanted to make sure you were giving them their proper due so that they didn't like, you know, kill all your cows or your sheep or whatever. So
as they want to do.
Right. I thought that was really interesting. And I guess that there is the dressing up part. They would recite verses going door to door, and you were trying to hide from like vicious spirits, which I believe there's this thing called AOSSI. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that was part of the like, okay, you want to be hidden from these you know, more malicious spirits on some level, and that's my very cursory understanding of Samhain. And but I do think it's interesting because it is that midpoint where it's like it's the end of the harvest. It's like, all right, we've done all the work. Now it's like, let's go out, like let's rage against the dying of the light and like just go out in a big blaze of glory. Which you see with the trees doing this, right?
It's interesting that you mentioned that it's actually about the end of. I think about it as like almost like we're girding ourselves for the descent. But it's interesting that like I kind of like your take that it's more like, oh my God, the work is done. You know, like everyone's like throwing down their shovels because like traditionally, right, this time of the year actually corresponded with a decrease in solar activity, unlike now in our unhinged culture of solar supremacy. I will not go on that entire rant, but but like, you know, like when you pass through,
where we have to do something all the time, right?
Literally every fucking day interminably until we die. It's completely unhinged. But it used to be, right, that there was actually a solar. The same way that the moon waxes and wanes throughout the month, there was a solar waxing and waning throughout the year that actually related to human activity, as opposed to it just being something objective that's going on outside, and we all get seasonal depression because we're expected to maintain the same level of leonine solar productivity.
Oh, it's insane. I've also felt very similarly and had similar rants about not allowing ourselves rest and relaxation time during the, you know, the darker part of the year.
Yeah,
And
right. We treat the sun like it's some kind of infinite. It's the same way we treat like other types of like resources, like energy, like on Earth, right? Like it's some kind of infinite, ever burning ball of gas, which it is outside of the context of human life. Like it is, it is objectively like that, but it's not like that on Earth. You know what I mean?
for a few more billion years, right?
Right.
until it dies too. But yes, you know, and this is something we're facing in a harrowing way with late stage capitalism, is that we've, you know, gotten into this mindset that we can have unlimited growth, and we're
Exactly.
really reaping the consequences of that right now, by the way that the earth is responding to that treatment. And I think that if we would to embrace the cycle, and embrace our malefics, our Mars and our Saturn, our rest periods and our severing from old forms rather than continually growing, I think we would really find a much healthier collective and a much healthier earth.
To create space for that fallow period. If you think about like I always think about crop rotation, right?
Yeah.
Like you want to like give the system time to like actually just like let some shit decay on it for a while,
Totally.
to like actually like not just aggressively deplete soil nutrients.
Yeah, because if you keep, you're right. Because if you keep trying to, you know, farm the same field with the same crop,
Right.
eventually
like make it produce.
Yeah, what grows there has no vitamins. Like it's not vital anymore. So
totally.
I think that's another part of the beauty of Scorpio season, right?
Exactly. I was going to tie it back to that.
Yeah, we're creating the loam, the compost that feeds the future fertility.
Yeah, and that has benefit in and of itself. Like that's intrinsically beneficial. Like it's not just like, oh, we're doing this, we're going to get through it, and then we're going to get to the Sagittarius season. It's going to be Jupiter again. Like I'm trying to practice in my own life right now the valuing of the periods that are restful, fallow, about dissolution, without appreciating them solely in the context for their utility for increased activity.
Right. I love that. And maybe that's part of the new paradigm that we're shifting towards with the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in the air signs versus the earth signs, right?
Totally. I have to shout out the NAP Ministry for that concept, by the way. They're on Instagram and Twitter. They're amazing, the NAP Ministry.
Nice. You could put a link in the chat box here. I'd love to
drop the names so people can
check out.
Look it up.
Yeah.
Radical resting.
So we're kind of breaking down the Samhain cross holiday, some meanings with that in the beginning of November. We have one aspect on November the 1st, besides this balsamic moon here that is, I would say, non-lunar, is the Mercury is going to be trining Jupiter, which is a repeat of the retrograde trine that Mercury had on October the 3rd. So potentially revisiting some kind of themes that we had around that period of time. Any thoughts about Mercury and Jupiter coming together?
I feel like there's always a really visionary quality when these two planets talk to each other, because it's their two different approaches to meaning, right? Like Jupiter is the like brain blown open, like, wow, that's a big picture idea, like type of meaning, right? And then that cannot be circumscribed with the mind, as our teacher Achuta would say. And then Mercury is the ability to break concepts down into discrete communicable packages, right? So when these two connect, especially in such a Jupiterian way, we might have a nice opportunity to communicate these big picture, it's too big to get my head around moments.
Yeah, I love that. And we've got Mercury hanging out on Spica. So potentially, so Spica is the concentration of the harvest point in the Virgo constellation. So I see Spica as being just very beneficial, where we both recognize our own gifts that we have to give to the world, but also it is a very helpful star where we might receive patronage or something of that nature. So we may be receiving messages from helpful people in our life that help move us forward. And especially because these two decans are about both restoring right proportion in the third decan of Libra,
Ooh.
and third decan Aquarius is really about untying karmic knots to move forward into the future. So releasing the past. So I think we may receive beneficial communication that helps us untie these old bindings that we have, so that we can move into a new ideal. Like, I think that's some of the difference between Scorpio and Aquarius. I think that there is, a physical separating from the body in Scorpio, but there's more of an idealism in Aquarius, being of the nature of air and being pure Saturn. Remember, Saturn was responsible for, or yearned for, the quote unquote golden age, and we can have arguments about whether that was like, there's really no golden age, but there are definitely some.
Was it so golden?
Yeah, well, there's definitely themes though with Saturn,
Right,
trying
like,
to
he wants order for something good.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted
utopian almost, potentially.
Well, and one thing I wanted to bring up as we were talking about these squares that we're going to be seeing from the Sun and Saturn and all of these things, really been getting into Liz Green lately and her book, The Luminaries. And she has this really interesting way of describing Saturn and the Saturn myths, where she was talking about Saturn castrating things into form. So there's a castration myth with Saturn where he castrated his father Uranus, and then he swallowed his children, the Olympians, Jupiter and Hestia, and all of those siblings. And so Liz Green's talking about when we bring something into form. And remember, Saturn was an agrarian god. Okay, totally. He was a god of agriculture.
That scythe had a very functional purpose that wasn't just dragging souls around.
Right. That we are eliminating future possibilities by concretizing it into matter. We are castrating, right?
Yes, eliminating future possibilities as the way Saturn shapes things into form is like my number one bit for him. Because it's like, when you have, if he's opposed to the lights, right? When you have just the lights, you have infinite manifestation, which is like basically the exact same as nothing. It's just like a shining void, right?
Well, that's sort of Jupiterian, isn't it? Like possibilities, endless like possibilities to expand.
Totally.
And I think that when he's swallowing his children too, he's afraid of the future. He's afraid of expansion. He says, I want this to be the same, and I think people have a real, you can
because he
attest
swallows
to this
all
too.
of the options.
Right, exactly. He says, all right, I'm going to keep this the way it is. But I think people even misunderstand Aquarius on some level too. And you can speak to this with more authority, I think, on some level, because you have some prominent Aquarian stuff in your chart, right? Without giving too much away. I don't know how much you share.
It's okay, I'll give it away. I have a Sun in Aquarius.
Okay. But I think that there's one of the ways that Joy Usher in the book A Tiny Universe talks about is there can be a sort of, it's definitely a 30,000 foot view, but it's also like, what narrative are we going to allow to be like to live? Do you know what I'm saying? Like sometimes with Saturn,
totally.
It's the elimination of other ideas.
This is totally even what narrative are we going to allow to live is such a Jupiter in Saturn sign thing, right? Because if Jupiter is the storyteller, right? And like, I love that so much because I've really been thinking about this, right? Because it's like less about we're sloughing off like old like objects and in Aquarius, and it's more like we're sloughing off old ideologies, like things like the narratives, and I'm seeing this in my own life, right? Like the narrative structures that shape my thoughts are shifting for the first time in maybe like a decade, I feel like, and that's really cool. It's like the container that tells you where you can think thoughts is actually, that's like what narrative myth does. I'll
tell you what, Liz Green, Joy Usher, two masters. Check out their books. I'm a huge fan. And I will say that what I love about Liz is that she anticipated a lot of the Hellenistic revival just from her thorough knowledge of myth. And it's just beautiful to see how that, fits into the new techniques that we've been uncovering, and how the myths fit with that and that archetypal type of experience. So, All right, so we've got this November 1st Jupiter Mercury trine. So that is a nice aspect that we start the month off with, restoring balance, releasing karmic ties. If we move forward one day, we are going to move into Scorpio 2. So you can see that the sun has now moved into that second decan. We have that 6 of cups type of experience. Austin Coppock calls this decan mutual distillation. My deep dive thought about this is it's about energetic exchanges that are distilling essence. But I think it's more about, because a lot of people talk about this card being a nostalgic card. I think it's kind of the coming together for like one final, like, you know, achemical union to eventually say, okay, we've distilled every last drop of vitality out of this so we can finally discard it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in the thought deck, it's called pleasure. So I feel like and obviously, like Crowley, the creator of that deck, is so into alchemical union of opposites as like his like number one thing. So if you have like alchemical processes going on that involve like two things coming together, like that to him is like the highest form of pleasure.
Yeah. Well, and think about this too. The in the Thema Mundi, the metaphorical natal chart of the world, Scorpio is on the 5th house. So it's pretty interesting to me to see that that's both associated with pleasure, but also leaving a legacy after death. If we look at it in context of the angular triad of the 4th house, of what happens after we go to the underworld for the judgment of Mott in the Libra.
After the end of the matter.
Exactly. So we leave things behind. We leave behind children, or we leave behind a legacy. We leave behind our creative works. All of those things.
Totally. That's a great thought about the 5th.
So we're also seeing on the 2nd, our friend, the square between the Libra 3 and Pluto. We've seen a number of planets over the course of October going through this square. The Sun, Mars, Mercury retrograde has gone through this square with Pluto. So we have the final pass, I think, of a non-lunar planet to this square for the time being. So what do you think about Mercury and Pluto coming together in this challenging energy potentially?
Yeah, I've been thinking about land equity nonstop with these like this month, like this past month. And I feel like that is like interesting. Like I'm just kind of throwing that out there because like Pluto, in addition to being all of these like very like literal like hellish things, and by that I just mean like maybe like underground, like it's also the 3rd share, right? It's like you who rules the 3rd share in the Orphic hymn, right? And the 3 shares are like air, water, and then like literally the ground, like the earth. So there's this huge connection to land, and like just literally land, and especially in Capricorn, I've been just getting hit over the head with this with Pluto and Capricorn. And I feel like that's a nice neutral Pluto thing. As opposed to some of the more like hellishly charged connotations of him. Sure. And with all these Libra planets, right, these questions of justice overcoming Pluto, I've just been thinking so much, and I've seen other people thinking about the equitable distribution of land, like people of color, like Black and Indigenous people of color specifically, who have been like systematically not given access to land, and like the impacts of that systemic withholding or active taking. I've just, with Mercury there, I feel like just like thinking, like I've just been like thinking about that as like Mars.
Well, that makes a lot of sense with this square in particular, because remember, we have the 3rd decan of Libra having a daimonic spirit nemesis is associated with it, the giver of what is your due and the restorer of right proportion. So maybe, and Pluto is in the 3rd decan of Capricorn, which has to do, I think, with administrative systems, with governments, with administration of power.
Yeah, like the throne, right?
Right. So you're talking about redistributing land to those that it may have been stolen from, right? And restoring the balance and restoring right proportion from some kind of past corruption. I think Pluto to me is always this. I used to think I say this ad nauseum. I have my own little ticks on this show, but but I used to say that Pluto was like the clogged toilet, which it is, but it's more the plunger that is saying, okay, you've ignored this for a long time. I'm going to erupt this from the underworld and come up, and you're going to have to deal with
Right.
this.
Like exactly,
Right?
like it digs deep, like it's excavating. That's another nice way to
Yes.
like tie those two functions to land, right?
Right. So maybe there's like you were saying, we're questioning Mercury, what would be fair to deal with this past governmental systemic corruption, and,
Yeah,
and
like
you were
what is
saying,
equitable?
and it could be very well related to the land, because I think that Capricorn especially is that very land, earthy expression of Saturn, right? That
Totally.
more
Yeah, exactly.
agricultural, agrarian Saturn, rather than the idealistic Saturn. You can think of Capricorn as the
Right.
combination of Mars and Saturn, rather than just pure Saturnian idealism. And there is Saturnian idealism. I think that does exist. It may be more sober than like Jupiterian idealism, but they each have their own agendas,
Yeah, I mean, Saturn
right?
idealism is like everyone can conform to the rules successfully, right? It's like it's
Right.
actually weirdly utopian, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like we're gonna do this thing and we're gonna set legislation down about how we're gonna behave inside the system, and then that's gonna go great. Like
Yeah.
that, like that idea, like no one's gonna rebel.
Yeah. I'm seeing we got some nice comments from Sasha here talking about Liz's book, A New Look at the Old Devil with Saturn. Great book. Really recommend people go out and check that out. Jared is here. Hello, Jared. Thank you
Jared.
for stopping by. And yeah, so we've got that square going on the 2nd. And then a day later, okay, a day later, we have an interesting moment of phasis with Mercury. Okay. So Mercury is going to be going within 15 degrees of the sun, okay, which is called its morning set. So you can see that Mercury is rising before the sun, and this is part of Mercury's synodic cycle. So when we have a relationship of a planet to the sun, we call that a synodic cycle. And Mercury is a really interesting one because it makes these multiple passes with the sun. It does a retrograde conjunction, which is called the inferior conjunction, and then it conjoins again from the superior position, which is the morning kind of direction. Now, here's one thing I wanted to throw out to you, and if you have I want you to meditate on this and see if you have any thoughts on this. Gary Caton once talked about the retrograde conjunction being Hermes going into the underworld and being the psychopomp. And I asked him, I was like, well, then when is Hermes visiting Olympus? And I thought maybe this superior conjunction may be that period of time,
Makes
right?
so much
Where
sense
he's
to me.
visiting the gods. So does that make sense? Does that work?
Yeah, it does make a
Yeah.
lot of sense to me because I think that, yeah, I have lots of thoughts about this Mercury as the messenger and the fact that he zips around faster than Earth, right? As the function of him that allows him to deliver messages between us and divinity. My cat has entered the
So
chat.
my question, do you think, who is this, the little friend that we have here?
This is Lucian.
Hi, Lucian. Hi.
He is a Scorpio. He just like can't let it not be about him.
My
right now.
kitties are locked out right now because they will try to unplug my router.
Oh my gosh.
So, but you can find them on my Instagram stories quite often because that's pretty much the only thing I post besides like advertising my live streams is videos of them.
That's important and valid.
So here's my question for you, and this is something that I've meditated on and I've been thinking about. When Mercury is visible, is he or they, I guess, because it's more ambiguous, are they on the Earth, and then when the superior conjunction happens, they are on Olympus, or are they returning to the Earth at the superior conjunction with messages from the collective or from Olympus? What do you think about that?
I feel like as they approach the sun, I feel like that is them approaching Olympus, but I think we could also see it as like, that's because I call Hermes before I call Olympians. Because I'm like, I'm like, carry your message to God's ear, basically, or like carry my message to God's ear. So I think that it's not just that function of him just like going to hang out with them to see what they have to say to us, but it's also like, it's not just the beginning of that cycle, it's the end of the cycle of us sending up a prayer, right? And like maybe setting in motion an intention. Like we have the whole time where Mercury isn't combust to like use his functions to like think through what we want, right? And like what we're asking of divinity. And then as he like goes into Kazemi, right, he like impregnates the, like, you know what I mean? Like he like enters the heart of the sun, and like he enters that space in the matrix through which the matrix of like reality, right, through which things can permeate out from, right? Like the sun can like shine it out into manifest reality.
So
yes,
you
the
think
one with Mars and Leo. Sorry.
So you think during this under the sunbeams phase, we are in the process of delivering our wishes and communications to a divine spirit to manifest?
Yeah, could be. It's hard though, because it's like I feel like the thinking mind stops functioning as well when this happens, right?
Yeah.
The thing that can break things down to language. So it's like you want to use the time leading up to it to distill the intention. And then it's like, maybe it's just like in motion at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that's always been something I've been meditating on, thinking about.
No, I really like that.
How it would all fit. And Gary Caton, of course, has a great book on the Hermes cycle and the achemical year of Hermes and whatnot, and Mercury. So check that out as well. He's kind of the Hermes dude. Okay, so we've got Mercury going under the sun's beams, which is called its morning set. It will be Kazemi on the 28th at 7 degrees of Sagittarius, but we'll get to that. And then we move forward here, and we're moving forward a couple days, or one day actually, and we are coming across the new moon in Scorpio. So what do you got for us? New moon, Scorpio, November the 4th.
What do I have for us? Oh gosh, obviously it's opposed Uranus, which is kind of a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's like within minutes.
Yeah, it totally is. I don't really have a ton of thoughts on this, except in the context of its connection to the coming full moon, because we're going to see that same Uranus catch a trine from Venus at this point. Excuse me. So it feels like me. You could like see him off screen. That's so funny. Sorry, he's insisting. You can see like this like thing that's like sort of like locked in, right? Get this relief on the new moon eclipse, but I think I'm gonna turn it over to you to just like kind of like start musing about like what you think this might manifest as.
Well, I think Lucian is trying to give us a preview.
I know. I'm just like, my brain is kind of like, I'm like.
Lucian is saying, "I am Prometheus."
He's like, "I'm here to fucking disrupt you. I have arrived."
So, okay, I have a couple thoughts. I think, we have to go back to that second decan of Scorpio and the kind of the merging of consciousness with some kind of other to distill down essence. Now, that can be for better or for worse. I think that sometimes when we merge emotionally with people, we can exchange good things, and other times we can exchange things that are toxic. So there may be an opportunity here to examine at this new moon the types of emotional, deep, intimate interchanges that help us to distill essence. Now, totally. with an opposition here to Uranus, I mean, I would say the first thing that you could look at is look at the Scorpio Taurus areas of your chart and realize that this new partnership, this new fusing of energies may have a disruptive quality for that opposite house. I'm I'll have to let all you know how this goes, because this new moon is exactly on my IC, and Uranus is going to be exactly on my MC. So
Oh my God.
something is going to be coming to fruition in my home life that may become visible at that eclipse, right? So I'll keep you all posted. But I think one other way we can think about this too is it's pretty close to a fixed star called Alphecca, which, from my understanding, has some significations with the myth of Ariadne, who helped Theseus escape from the labyrinth. She gave him some string to be able to find his way out of the labyrinth, and eventually he married her, but then abandoned her on an island. Only for her to be
Classic.
right. It's like, oh, sorry, thanks for helping, But then Dionysus was like, okay, you're pretty hot. Like, you could be my wife or something like that. I don't know why he chose her, but maybe he had pity.
Dionysus.
Right. So I think that there's a gift of social status that comes with some sort of challenge, right? I've seen some material about, like, Princess Diana had a prominent Alphecca placement. Marilyn Monroe had something to do with Alphecca,
Okay.
where you were given this gift of like status, but then it came with its own pains. So I guess what I would say is two things. Be careful if you are offered an opportunity to rise in social status at this new moon, that it may not cause a disruption in another part of your life, because it may come with a price. The other thing that with Scorpio too is I think that we can get involved with relationships that may end up being either codependent or like energy vampire type of experiences where we're feeding on one another. So I would be careful of that too. That it could be a time where you could get involved with that type of thing around this period of time. Does that make sense?
Totally. That sounds like something to watch out for.
And
I
then
like
we're
that Promethean lightning bolt like imagery, like coming into the dark moon.
right. Yeah. Prometheus and Uranus. I think Richard Tarnas made that kind of connection in Cosmos and Psyche. Schmidt calls Uranus kind of a transcendental sun. Robert Schmidt of Project Hindsight, where it's like kind of this like idealistic vision for a collective, like, and I think I could see that. I could see rebellion happening, because what happens when reality doesn't match up with the idealized version? People get mad. Like,
Totally.
so the sun is going to be opposite Uranus here, and obviously at this new moon as well. So there may be some frustration or impatience or erratic behavior where your personal will may not be matching up with the will of the collective. So I think that, yeah, this is the fruition of the Sun Uranus conjunction that happened around April the 30th. And I remember in my own life, I was dreaming about getting a farm and like going off of grid or something like that.
It's
And
like literally my dream every day.
right, our cottage core dreams, right? Like, and I've been speaking a lot with my partner about like, how do we make that a reality? So I wonder if there will be
Me too,
themes,
to my partner.
right? So maybe that's part of this as well. So we'll see. All right.
Yes. God willing.
Yeah, so we'll keep on rolling here. We've got some ground to cover still.
Yeah, we've got some folks in the chat being like, damn, we're on the 4th.
I know. We need to keep going. So
yeah, we'll say
try to
we'll
speed
say
it up.
less.
So on November the 5th, Venus moves into Capricorn. We've got some Two of Pentacles action. Also, Mercury moves into Scorpio as well. So what are your thoughts on, you had some thoughts on Scorpio, Mercury and Venus in Capricorn here, right?
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that new moon and the Uranus being brought into play. And this is going to take us through like the whole month, this energy, I think, of Venus in Capricorn, right? Because like that, she's there the entire time. But so I've just been getting this vibe so hard of Athena, right? We've been talking about like the solar order, like just sort of like the order to which we all adhere in various contexts. And Athena is like she's like the birth of Athena, right, is like she like explodes from the head of her father. For some reason, like Zeus eats her, I guess. He's just like, I guess, like processing father trauma for being eaten by his own father, I guess. Like and I mean, it's yeah, I don't know what the deal is with that exactly, but she's in there. There's that gestational thing happening, right, where like something is being digested, and then she comes out in this like non-servum, like I will not serve way, right, where she literally just like bursts forth from his head. That's very Uranian to me, right? And I think we're going to see the bursting forth like that of Athena, right? Because we have all these planets in Scorpio, and what is that receptive Mars, or like a feminine Mars too? I think Athena is a great example of that, because there's no way in which she's like a debilitated Mars, right? Like she's definitely a dignified Mars, like and she's like, yeah. So I think that is like a really interesting thing to think about as Venus enters Capricorn, because like Capricorn is like the realm of Saturn, right? So it's like kind of is like the order. And Athena is not, she's a servant of the order very much. She's like known for her wisdom. She patrons heroes. So like all of the main characters of Greek mythology, like she's most of their patrons, right? Like Odysseus is like a prime example, Perseus. She's not like, it's not like there's not like a rebellion happening here with Athena. It's like the like Venus is entering the realm of Saturn, right? She's like entering the system. I know a person with Venus in Saturn sign who is like an incredible businesswoman, but like also a witch, and is like really anti-capitalist, but is also like leveraging money to gain personal power. And so I feel like Venus in Capricorn kind of reminds me of that, where it's like, how can we take all of these resources and like my Venusian arts and put them to the task of pleasure, right, and enjoyment. It's kind of a pivot off the Athena topic, but I like that for her. So like she's just on this sojourn, so I feel like you're gonna get a chance to like be introduced to Athena with all of these, because it's not just Venus and Capricorn that's her, it's Venus and Capricorn being sextiled by this like super dignified Mars, right, that's like combining these two archetypes that brings out this like Athenian situation.
Yeah, that's a super interesting take, because Capricorn is also the exaltation house of Mars, so you're bringing Mars into that place as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Circling back to the tarot, you've got the Two of Pentacles card for the first decan of Capricorn, and that to me is it's the beginning of the Earth cycle, where we are trying to think about the best place to build or to incarnate, right? It's the return of the solar year at the winter solstice with this zero Capricorn point. There's Austin talks a lot about finding out what the genus loci is of a place, the spirit of a place.
The genus loci, yeah, totally.
Yeah, genus loci. Yeah, there you go. Like, I don't know how to pronounce that.
I'm like 80% on that one.
Yeah, right. I'm just glad I got Samhain right today. So, I think that it's really, you may be attracted to the advantages and disadvantages of a physical place with this placement as well. Going back to our cottagecore dreams that I think many people share in the chat box here.
Chat, yeah.
Maybe this is a time where it's like, hey, where is the best place to build the farm or to lay down roots or something like that? And we may be trying to think about, what that looks like. You think about it in order. If you have the cardinal sign of Capricorn, where do we build? All right, where are we going to construct our skeletal system like Saturn would want to do? And then, you move to Taurus, the fixed sign, and you have to plow the fields and then fertilize them and fructify them, plant the seeds and grow
like
something.
first decade of Cap is like setting like gears in motion to like actually create like change.
Yeah. Well, and then finally you get to Virgo, where you're reaping the harvest of what you've grown through the Taurus cycle type of thing. So there's definitely stories there. It's interesting to try to contextualize things in linear fashion, because I think that there's so many different ways to view time. I always find myself trying to look at different like circular linear patterns, but I don't know. It's always
absolutely. I was thinking about that preparing for this for sure. So I was like, oh, how would I describe Athena? I regularly describe her as Venus and Aries, right? Because it's like a Venusian in an Aries in context. And I think that that makes sense when you're looking at it from one direction, but then looking at it from this other direction of the Martian dignity, right? It also like another story gets told with Mars and Scorpio. It's like a kaleidoscope, pictures.
What about Mercury here moving into Scorpio? I have my notes. I just wrote down a cunning intelligence, a hunger for information and depth, questioning motives, revealing hidden processes. I like the word questioning with Mercury. I always feel like wherever Mercury is going through,
probing.
It's like, yeah, there you go.
Like Scorpio, y'all are the king of the probing question.
Yeah.
I feel
maybe this is the point where we're casting doubt on, what our actual desire nature is, right? I don't know. I like Mercury for casting doubt and destabilizing and saying, all right, let's shake it up. I almost think Mercury has a little bit of that, some of the qualities that we ascribe to Uranus sometimes too, where it's saying, all right.
Yeah, the busting of the carapace, right?
Yeah.
Like we're coming out of our shell.
For sure.
I wanted to mention that being a receptive sign again, and also Scorpio is traditionally known as a mute sign. So we have Mercury, who is very chatty, entering a mute sign, and it's a receptive water. So I feel like it takes on less of these connotations of speaking as it does listening. And like we have Scorpio as we kind of talked about that, right? Like Scorpios are able to hold that space, to hold the container, to receive information. This is what makes, I feel like, Scorpio the brilliant strategist that it is that it perceives everything. It's like taking it in, right? And then like collating the information.
Yeah. So to put your listening caps on, right?
Everybody put their listening caps on.
Yeah. Well, think about this though. If you embrace silence, think of all the secrets that you can learn when you're observing people.
Exactly. That's totally it. That's totally it.
Right.
Yeah. And communication might get a little bit hard as Mercury enters Scorpio, especially due to its proximity to the sun. But it's not hard in a Mercury retrograde way where you're just like, people are talking past each other, that kind of thing. It's deep water. Scorpio deals with in things that lie beneath the surface. And as such, it's stuff that's difficult to describe, right? Because language, the mercurial function, it's very airy, right? So if we're trying to swords language, right? Like talk in the airway with discrete meaning and like the back and forth that we're so used to with like Gemini, for example. We're not going to get very far with Scorpio Mercury. So I feel like it's a time to communicate in this nuanced way that like feels into our emotional body. Like don't put the pressure on words to do exactly their discrete job. Like we have to be like the fish in water as opposed to like an air human creature trying to like swim swiftly in water.
Well, maybe also don't even feel that you have to do all the inane social pleasantries. You can just get to the heart of the matter, cut through the crap and just like, what are you really trying to say here?
Definitely. Yeah. I also love that about Scorpio. Like you don't have to fuck around with like pleasantries and stuff like that. Yes, Lucian, you're a very good Scorpio.
All right. So on the 6th, we have just a little minor aspect with Mercury sextiling Venus at 1 degree of Scorpio and Capricorn. So maybe, some of these things cooperating with one another maybe we'll hear some messages around a potential new opportunity with related to location or things of that nature. I don't want to spend too much time on the sextiles because
Yeah, I'll let you just like carry us through a
they're
little bit
helpful, but
to get us click through
yeah,
some time.
I do think that we should spend some time on this day here, though, November the 10th, because there's quite a bit of action happening on November the 10th as we move forward
Yeah,
to Wednesday. Yeah, this is a big day.
this is a
So
lot.
a couple things that I'll point out, and then we'll kind of dive into it. So first of all, we are seeing a Mercury Mars conjunction that is simultaneously squaring Saturn. So we've got all of this stuff kind of, firing us up, and then it's squaring Saturn. And also the moon is activating Saturn with a conjunction that day as well. So it's not only are we feeling this non-lunar aspect, but the moon, which I sort of think about as like a music box cylinder that strikes all the notes of the other planets on some level.
I like that.
So it's really like we're going to hear the tone of Saturn come up with this day as well. What are you seeing with this square here with these planets?
Like, ow! Like anytime you get this much shit like in a square, it's pretty atypical that you. LOL. Kira says I marked this day on my calendar as all caps. No work, no social media, and honestly, that is brilliant. Every time I see a dumpster fire pop off on Astro Twitter, I then at the end of the day see the one wise person be like, wow, I'm really glad I looked at the transits today and decided not to log on at all.
Right.
And I'm just like, damn, wish I were you.
For sure.
This might be a day for that.
It's a spicy day, right?
It's really spicy.
Yeah.
It's totally spicy. It's like there's not a lot of motion though, because it's fixed.
Yeah. So ways that this could play out that Kira is pointing out, it would be, maybe take a time out from social media. You could probably expect to feel fired up with Mars conjoining Mercury about something that's very deeply important to you. And it may be causing a conflict with something that may lead to an eventual defeat. The Saturn's in the Decan associated with the Five of Swords, which is called defeat. So if you kind of pop off about something, and these arguments on this day could get really nasty, because I think that
they're about something so structural,
right? And it could be about like some kind of social construct.
Yeah, but I see potentially like women being implicated here too, with the Mars making that sextile to Venus. That could be it could be like something like women's rights oriented comes up in the news, or like something like that.
Definitely,
because with it overcoming all of those guys in Aquarius, it's very much like the system. You know what I mean? Like we're throwing a Martian spear at the system,
like a Molotov cocktail into.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that the fights that could come up with this could be especially nasty, because one of the gifts of Scorpio is being able to, through that silent observation, to be able to see a weakness and to be able to be like, oh, I know exactly where the psychological weakness is. And
so true, because that receptive consciousness, right, has been taking it all in, and it's like, it's not necessarily that it even takes a long time. It's like sometimes they just like see it, you know what I mean? It's like, the cracks in the carapace.
It's intuitive. Intuitive,
That's a great word for it.
So I think that, you may be tempted to go right to the very core of something, or someone may, do that to you. And you want to be very careful, because that can lead to a real feeling of exile, a real feeling of smashing your head headlong into the brick wall. That's what I see Mars like making this square to Saturn, is we want to move forward. We want to fight. We want to, get to the core of something, but our movement is limited, it's
totally.
It's that frustration.
It's like with fixed energy like this, it's not that our movement is limited only in the present, right? Because like fixed energy unfolds over long periods of time. So if the impulse is because of this intense square energy, right, that's going to be something coming up, popping off, right, in the moment. Even though that's there, right, I feel like we want to stretch out our consciousness over time and not attempt to address it in the fucking moment per se. Like it could just be like a healing exercise. Like if I run into something like a deep, say I were to run into like some kind of like, Scorpio's my 12th. So if I'm going to run into something like really acute, what I'm going to try and do is pull myself back from that place of acute stimulation and maybe just like take some bullet points about the big feelings I'm having right now, and then explore them later, like in a safe container.
Yeah, and you, like you're saying, to be able to be objective. I think this could be the conflict between passion and almost obsession about an emotional ideal versus being detached, and saying, okay, what is really best for all or the whole or whatnot. I want to share a short anecdote. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version of this, because I went back and I looked at the last Mars-Saturn square in my own life, because I write all the aspects in the margins of my journal, which I would highly recommend if you want to contextualize. Sometimes. Yeah. And it was, now granted, this is Mars in Libra versus Saturn in Capricorn. So it'll be a little bit of a different flavor, but my daughter is a competitive swimmer, or she was pre-pandemic, and I was getting really into it, and I was being a little bit helicopter parenty about it. Not a little, a lot. I was getting too into it. And I would go to like practice, and there was another teammate that she had that was really like slacking off, like wasn't taking it very seriously, but also was in a position of authority. And I got sort of really irritated because this person was making my daughter feel bad for working hard. And she was sitting out for like half of the practices, and like, but also like making fun of my daughter for putting in the hard work, which is what I was trying to teach her, and I just lost my cool. This was happening for a long period of time, and I just sort of like blew up at this other child. Like, oh no. Literally, like, it was a high school kid, so it wasn't like they were like a little kid. They were a senior in high school. So, but
you still don't feel good about it.
Right, I felt terrible. It was not my place. It was just my frustration bubbling over, and I got kicked out of practice. I got a call from like the athletic director of the school eventually, be like, "You're not going to be in practice," like, and I was like, "Okay, I totally understand. I'm super sorry. Like, that was super inappropriate. I get it." And it was also because I had a deep desire for her to improve. And I was coming across the limitations of the situation and running headlong into that brick wall. And my frustration bubbled over into a point where I received a Saturnian like reality check. Rebuke, exactly. And I'm nervous now because that was in my third house to my sixth house. This one's going to be angular for me. So hopefully I've learned my lesson from this last Mars-Saturn, rebuke, that I don't repeat that. But
I think what you're describing is an example of attempting to deal with a long-term protracted thing, like in the moment, when the moment doesn't support it, because like Saturn is like, nah.
Right. And exactly. It was a momentary desire, and that of wanting to change a system that I didn't have control over, because like her high school swim team is sort of dysfunctional. It wasn't the most well organized. I was just getting really upset about the disorganization of it.
Right. It's the whole thing. It's like the entire thing. I want my daughter to have a positive athletics experience. And then it's you see the opportunity occur in the contact between Mars and Saturn to like address it, but it's like you've addressed it acutely when the problem is systemic.
I read that story and I was like, oh man, that's such a perfect story. And throughout this entire period, I was trying to get her on this new club team that was a little bit more functional. And I was so frustrated that we couldn't get on the team. And eventually we did, and she had a really good experience with it, but I had to learn patience. So I really think that the delayed gratification, delayed gratification is still, I think, the modus operandi here. Don't let momentary acute desires in the moment lead to a retribution or a rebuke. You have to be patient with it. And this may be socially as well. We want change. We want that idealized Saturnian narrative, right? But we may have to live into those answers I just think that sometimes change happens incrementally, and I know that that's hard because we want to force the issue sometimes, right?
Yeah, well, and I
But I don't
also
know.
think that change can happen explosively, but it's like it has to
Yeah,
occur at the right moment. This is not a moment
right.
of explosive change actually
No,
transpiring. It could be a moment of
no.
explosion, but it's not like something where you're like catching a trine from Uranus or something. Like when your
Right.
movement just gets that chance to blow past a boundary, right?
Totally. And you know, the other thing is, the thing about it is these are fixed signs. Everyone's going to be very entrenched in their particular
Exactly.
position. There's not going to be a whole lot of wiggle room with these aspects. And that's something to keep in mind is you may have to live with the fact that this person's entrenched in their position, this other person's entrenched in theirs. But I do think that, you know, just previewing the end of the month, our belief systems will be getting a little bit of a renewal with the south node contacts with Mercury and the Sun. So even if this period of time is frustrating, there is relief that we may experience at the end of the month when Sagittarius season starts up. So be careful around the middle of the month that you don't get into these like really toxic arguments that can't possibly be won at that period of time. And like Kira is saying, maybe it's time to sit this one out a little bit and like just practice your self care. You know, right?
Go touch grass.
Yes, there you go. All right, so that's the 10th. If we move forward, that's good. I think that's a really great way of thinking about this. We move forward to the next day, 11/11. We see the sun moving into Scorpio 3. So we do have a new decan that we're going to be experiencing where we get maybe outside of this, you know, I don't know, a chemical exchange energy and more into the temptation to renew a form that is way past its prime. So this may be the time where we've sucked all the essence out of that relationship and now we have to say it's over. Let's return it to the earth so we can liberate the new spirit for something new. Okay. We're going to have a first quarter moon on this day too, where a square between that scorpionic energy and the leaving the past behind energy that the moon's happening here. So I always think of first quarter moons as material crises, right? Where we're trying to bring something into being, but there's always this challenge that we've got to overcome in manifestation. Um, any thoughts on quarter moons?
I'm oddly getting this sense just like in my body almost of this like Decan being like um asking ghosts for help with a task kind
Oh
of.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
there's this like it's conjoined Jupiter, right? This quarter moon
Mm-hmm.
is like one way to make it make sense. But like I know that like Austin has this Decanic imagery of like basically like a crow seeking something shiny, right, in the
Right, right.
woods or something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of, and I'm hearing you describe it. It's like, oh, all of the juice has been sucked out of it. I'm thinking about like casting yourself back to a magical system of the past, right? And like taking, like stealing that like alchemical knowledge, right, from
Mm.
like, yeah, like the pockets of a Rosicrucian or something like that to like to use for or just like asking an ancestor a question. That could be like a great connotation
I
of
love
this.
that. I love it. I love the ancestral part of this season of November in particular, because I do think that's part of the solution to some of these challenges we're experiencing is,
Totally.
you know, having a conversation with that spirit world, with the other side. Um, you know, being able to separate reality from uh, past. You know, there's a dime on our spirit with this decan called Kairos, and then Kairos is basically translates to opportunity. And the myth goes is that Kairos has a little lock of hair that comes off his forehead, and you can only catch him from the front. Even Zeus himself can't catch Kairos from behind. So it's like you can't chase this moment that's past. You have to accept the fact that it had its moment, and you will start to create painful suffering if you start trying to chase this moment that has already outlived its time. So return it to the earth, because if once you return that form to the earth, the essence remains, and the essence will be able to find a new vehicle, a new
Right.
host. And that's what we're heading towards with Sagittarius 1. So
If we think about it like an ancestor, it's like they don't need to cling to life to like still like be in like the ancestral realm, right, for you to
right,
confer with in the future.
right. remains. And that's where the faith part comes in. And that's why sometimes Scorpio is associated with, having like experience of the other worldly experience. You do see some religious zealotry in this area of the zodiac, Scorpio and Sagittarius on some level as well. And I think that part of that is learning to discard that form, to know that, think about it not as what you're losing. I always tell clients that have this 5 of Cups first decan is, look, there's 2 cups still remaining. Yes, mourn your losses, but it's reversing to the gratitude of what is left, and realizing that when we get in touch with essence versus form, that essence can take all sorts of new forms. So you're really just clearing the decks to be able to have a expression of who you are now, not who you were. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's so nice. I love that. Like, even though you're leaving something behind, it's disappointing to let go of. Like, right. You get to sit with like what you became in the process of having that thing.
Totally. All right, let's go forward to the 12th. Here we have a Sun Jupiter trine. Whew. What do you think about Jupiter? What are your thoughts? Or I'm sorry, Jupiter, it's Neptune. Sorry.
Oh.
No, we have a Sun Neptune. Sorry, my brain is doing different things. It's saying weird words. So we have a Sun Neptune trine. What are your thoughts on Neptune? Because I have a weird experience with Neptune, but I'm curious as to what other people feel.
I get dissolution a lot from Neptune. Like, it's like the power of the waters to erode structure, erode form. And I know Achyuta has this thing about Sun Neptune connection, specifically in the context of oppositions. I think he says that it has like the ability to like erode your sense of identity, erode your sense of self. So it being a, you know what I mean? Like, but it being a trine, that's maybe happening in a way that's like actually like to your advantage, to your liking. Like, you get to have a positive experience of letting yourself be the hanged man with his head like floating in the idea, right, like in the mystical Neptunian waters. Like, you're choosing it, right?
Yeah,
it's not
like, I like that.
Yeah.
I often get really tired with Neptune contacts. Just like my body just is like, nope, I'm not going to do anymore, and it almost forces you to get that kind of like, I guess transcendent quality that they associate with Neptune sometimes. Do you ever get that with Neptune contacts?
I'm not sure I've observed that directly, but yeah. I'm gonna look out for it now.
I just get fatigued. Like, I'm just like, I don't want to do anything. I just want to dissolve into a massive lump on the couch type of thing.
Right, like your ability to be like a solar emitter is just like, you're just like, I'm not sure this is actually my priority, right?
Yeah, and piggybacking off of what Achyuta was saying, he also points the direction to what Robert Schmidt would consider Neptune as a transcendental moon, which I thought was interesting. Like, we've got a transcendental sun with Uranus, but this lunar substance versus the animating spirit of the sun. Neptune is that dissolving back into universal substance. And maybe that's why my body is like, nope, I'm not going to do anything today, because I'm dissolving back into the prime materia type of thing. So
I do not need to be today.
Watch out for that on this day. All right, the 13th, we're starting to get into a little bit of some challenging aspectual relationships. Here we're seeing Mercury making an opposition with Uranus, which is going to be one of the, a continuation of that new moon opposition. Whew. What do you think? What do you got?
That's pretty Promethean, because it's like Mercury is Promethean to begin with. Yeah. Like, I really feel that, and with the opposition, it's like kind of the aspect kind of tells you like how the theft of fire is going to be received by the collective, right? And in this case, badly, maybe.
Yeah, I think that we may have some disruptive communications for sure.
Oh yeah, that's
exchanges, right? Some shocking things may come out of your mouth or the mouth of others. Just restless mind too.
Yeah, like maybe it'll be like a moment in the sort of like mute sign thing where
Yeah.
like you get like a lightning bolt understanding of like what you actually want or need to say. But like, yeah, I would watch out for timing on that, because with the opposition, it could be a little bit tricky.
Definitely. A little tricky. All right. Now, if we move forward to November the 15th, we're going to see a square between the Sun and Jupiter. Oh, this is conjoined a fixed star called Unakalhi, which is at about 22, 23 degrees Scorpio, which is the heart of the serpent in the hands of Ophiuchus, the healer, Asclepius, right?
Cool.
So that's kind of neat. There's some associations with taming our, I don't know, serpentine natures, or there are some authors that associate the serpent with desire nature. There are others that think of it as transformation and you know, with its ability to shed its skin. There's a lot of different angles we could look at serpent mythology with this. I'm seeing this as like Jupiter Sun contacts, especially squares, like too much of something, you know, or it's just like, all right, we're having awareness of what we want to bring to order or what we want to expand on, but you know, there's some challenge involved. What do you think?
Especially if this is falling in one of the houses that's in charge of like health or doctors or the body for you, this could be a really useful time to seek insight, like stellar insight on that. Because if you have like, I feel like the serpent is like, to me, innately connected with like oracular pursuits, like the Pythoness at Pythia, for example. And I don't know, I just feel like that could be a useful, like whenever the sun and Jupiter are my two guys for like, please bring meaning into my consciousness in a way that comes from above, right? It's like if Mercury is our messenger, it's like these are the two people that they're just like delivering messages from in a way that I tend to petition towards. So I feel like this could be a great time to ask for like, just like, you know, if you're having like a protracted issue, like a square in your life, like you'd be like, show me the way out of this, like do like a great day to pull some tarot cards if you have that practice, or like ask for omens or something like that. It's kind of a way to like remediate the square a little bit, is to just like give it, like assign it a square task maybe.
Yeah. And maybe there's some conflict in those areas of your life, the Scorpio and Aquarius areas of your life, that actually lead to new wisdom, new realizations.
Totally.
The Sun to me lately has been like this big spotlight. It says, hey, here, I'm going to shine my light of awareness. Awareness is the word that I've really gravitated towards with the Sun on this area of life. And maybe through the awareness of our attachment to old ghosts or forms, that will help. And it might be difficult, but it may help Jupiter to release us from the old karmic ties. Like I think of Jupiter as like the actions that we take that will bring us honor and merit, you know, like it's active. Whereas like Venus is more about like, okay, you're receiving some good stuff because it's more receptive. It's lunar, you know. It's more about fortune and 2K rather than the daimon or the spirit that you take action from. So
yeah,
I would say,
feel like
go ahead.
Jupiter is like that like silver surfer through the life of meaning, right? Like if Venus is like basking in pleasure, I mean, then I think that Jupiter would be the like, I am taking steps on my path. Like, you know what I mean? And what is the path, right? It's the path towards like your personal meaning centered, like orienting yourself towards your North Star, like leading the life that's going to be the most rich in knowledge, wisdom, joy, happiness, like that kind of stuff is all very Jupiterian. And and with the Sun there, illuminating what stands in your way, that could be a great thing. What Aquarian things stand in your way? What ideologies have maybe completely,
what limits, maybe even, right?
Yeah.
Limiting
Thoughts.
That's a good
one.
What glass ceilings?
With Ophiuchus there too, I feel like, or Ophiuchus, I feel like it's it gives that like Asclepian energy too. So there's this healing thing happening here. And I feel like with Apollo involved. Like if you take like the sun as Apollo in this situation, like it gives this, it's psyche healing, you know what I mean? As opposed to it necessarily being that lunar, oh, it's of the body. It's like we're healing the psyche in this moment.
Well, and think about this too. Where Zeus is, aka Jupiter, is tying up loose ends before he moves into his nocturnal home. You know, so it's like, all right, are you going to release the limiting beliefs, the glass ceilings that will stop you from manifesting from your spirit? You know, because I think
Totally.
when Jupiter gets into Pisces, it's like, all right, go into the matrix and like be Neo. You know, like,
Right. Yeah. Mo
so
on Twitter said this thing too, where it's like everybody wants the good juice of Pisces. This is astral tar. Is there at, but everyone wants the good juice of Pisces, but nobody wants to do the work of like figuring out which of these frameworks is actually making it so we're not able to get to that juice, right?
that makes sense. Well,
I've just been thinking about that
here's
all
one other
month
addition I will say to that, because that's a really great point. I've read some source texts that talk about Saturn being the blueprint and then Jupiter being the demiurge that creates from that blueprint.
Yeah,
so,
I've heard that too.
So you get clear with what your blueprint is, and then you can go about creating, you know? So use this time period to say, what really is the ideals that I'm going to be creating from when Jupiter moves into Pisces.
Exactly, and like clarifying your intention is again this thing. Like,
love it.
Like you have to do that work in order to manifest the thing.
Yeah. All right. 16th. 16th, we have a sextile between the Sun and Pluto. Not a super huge aspect, so I'm going to kind of just skip over that. But there may be some, you know, maybe you'll get an awareness of some of the benefits of, you know, doing the hard work to unclog the toilets of your life, especially when it comes to administrative systems. I think that might be something we could see with that. And if we move forward to the 17th, that actually, I do want to address that, because on the 17th, we have a Mars Uranus opposition. So we're getting we have a theme this month, just like we had the squares between the third decan Libra planets and Pluto. This month, one of the themes is the oppositions between Scorpio 2 and Uranus in Taurus 2. And just to clarify, Taurus 2 is that decan is all about the rhythms that create fertility, the daily habits, the hore, or the hours, right? The forces of nature that are rhythmic. So Uranus is just taking a huge, giant lightning bolt dump on any like routines that we have. And all these planets are going to be activating that like shakeup of our routines. I remember there was when Venus made its opposition to Uranus, the power in my house went out. And this was right on my IC. And when we were out without power for over 24 hours, and I had to completely redo I had the live stream with Mercurius George, where I was completely out of my element and in like an office building because I didn't have power, and it was a real shakeup, right? And it's I think we could see something like that happening again, like a shakeup of our routines.
How do you feel like that's gonna change, given that it's Uranus is contacting this like dignified Mars? Like, how do you feel like that, like the level of dignity that the contacted planet has?
Yeah.
I think the fact that Mars is applying.
You know, I've often had this question, and I will toss it back to you for a second. What do you feel about? I've always thought that there's a mixed bag with dignified malefics. I think that they are, you know, more predictable in their maleficence, but I don't know if it's always like good. It's like they can wreak more havoc in a dignified place.
A lot of clients ask me this question too, and it comes up in client sessions a lot. Where it's like, is it actually good for the native to have a well-resourced malefic?
Right.
I kind of think about it. Well, let me think about this. I feel like when a malefic is well-resourced, it is less cranky, and that. Is my audio good? Sorry, someone just tried to call me.
You're good.
All right, cool. Sorry about that. when it's well resourced, it's less cranky. You know what I mean? It's not experiencing these day-to-day problems of having to like struggle to do its work. And that might make it a little more noble. I think there are noble Martian pursuits like that we've discussed, that witnessing. And I also think the scorpionic intelligence of Mars and Scorpio natives is so like pure. Like they're just like, they're all like brilliant in this like specific way. Like it feels like a shining ruby to me. And I feel like that is definitely, but when it turns to malefic ends, right, then it's like you don't necessarily want that guy. I don't know. I feel like, yes, I'm going to come out and say, yes, I think that it's more friendly to the native to have a dignified malefic.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely more predictable. I think that that's, I think that when we've got a malefic in it, like we've had with Libra, like Mars will manifest in really weird ways that are, you know, not normal martial ways, like maybe passive aggressive ways, or, you know, separating us from things that are usually sources of harmony. Yeah, I think that one thing Schmidt says with this, I really like leaning on Robert Schmidt. He's a genius. Is sometimes the dignified malefic can bring the native good fortune from difficult
at the
circumstances.
Expense of others. Yeah,
right,
Chris Brennan brought this up on in his Norwalk talk, and gosh, I've noticed that. I have a dignified Saturn, and it's like the pandemic, for example, like enabled me to like launch my full-time astrological practice. Right, I have a dignified Saturn in the second house. Like my resource situation, time as a resource in the second house, that changed in a way that allowed me to do something really productive and useful for me inside a context that is objectively garbage.
Well, so think about this. Let's bring it back to this aspect here. Maybe there's something shocking, a shocking separation, right? That eventually leads to good fortune. That by getting outside of your own, shaking up your own routine, you find that you can benefit and distill essence down from something. But it may feel a little bit disruptive at first, for sure, and maybe even feel violent. But eventually it could lead to some kind of new awareness, realization, new partnership type of thing. It may even be a separation from a partnership, though, because this is the other thing.
It's ultimately actually useful. That kind of plays into your third house or third decan sun theme.
Right. Because think about the planets. Like they're going to still be themselves in each of these decans. So Mars is going to maybe create either conflict or separation from the themes associated with that decan. So maybe there's a separation from a toxic person or something that is an energy vampire, and you finally get liberation from that, and that brings you benefits, right? So something of that nature.
Mars is like, I think we have something better to do with this energy.
Right.
Like I feel like that's what he might say to you.
For sure. I'm checking the chat box here. Thank you all for sticking with us. You all are troopers. We're doing our marathon session today. I think we're hitting hour number 2 here. So we'll thank you for hanging out with us. Zachary Powell is here and saying that was a great way to talk about Mars, Hawk. And the astrology, Kira, is saying that someone with both malefics dignified in their preferred signs. I totally agree. So we're getting confirmation with someone who's living this.
That malefics are more useful to you. And I see that with you, Kira, all the time, right? Like you are such a powerhouse, right? And I feel like that Mars, obviously there are downsides, but like that dignified Mars is just like you can just do so much, and you've like constructed like almost like a kingdom, you know what I mean? Like, and just like you're wielding your skill. All
right. As we take our collective breath here before we go down the home stretch, if you are enjoying this video, make sure you hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, you can subscribe and hit that notification bell. That always is helpful. It helps the algorithm if you hit that like button. So appreciative of all the new people that I'm seeing here in the chat today. And make sure that you follow the links for Hawk's work as well at the studentofthestars.wordpress.com. Is that correct? Did I get that all correct?
Just drop it like this bit.
Drop it in the chat.
/AstroHawk.
For sure. All right, so let's keep rolling. We ready? Can we catch our collective breath here? So this is bringing us.
I might let you take this next day and just pop into the restroom real quick if you don't mind.
Yeah, you might have to return the favor to me in a minute. So.
Awesome. Let's do it.
All right.
I believe in you.
So I'm going to talk here about the 18th of November. And this is, we've got a Mercury-Neptune trine. So Mercury is going to be trining that retrograde Neptune in Pisces. So again, some of the themes about maybe, Kira earlier was talking about that Neptune may have this feeling of like this opiate feeling, where, you're taking a substance and it may shift your sense of reality. And I think that might be something we're experiencing here on the 18th as well. So be careful with details on this day. If you're doing something that is very involved or requires detailed work, you may want to save that for another day. But this could be a great day for doing something meditative, doing some sort of artistic thing, maybe just checking out for a little while and taking a break after some of these challenging aspects that we've been dealing with. And this is going to bring us to the lunar eclipse on the 19th. And I think I'll wait a little bit to talk about this because I want to get Hawk's thoughts on this because this is such a big part in the cycle. But if you have any questions in the chat, throw them in there. I've got a little bit of like a 20-second delay on the chat, so we'll see them in a minute. But Abraham is saying that, yeah, it's awesome. Rather than being above my reading level, so I'm flagging, I'm warring on. Thank you, Abraham, for being here. Thank you for sticking with us.
Abraham, that's great Scorpio energy too, I feel like.
Yeah, it says we both seem to be mutable. Are we both mutable risings? No. You are, right?
I am, yeah.
We're both fire risings, so our fires are inspiring each other. I'm a Leo ascendant, but I have a lot of mutable planets in my chart. I have a Virgo stellium in the 2nd, and a Cancer sun in the 12th, and a Taurus moon in the 10th, and all of that is all that Virgo stuff is squaring a Venus and Gemini in the 11th house. So I very mercurial when it comes to some of this stuff.
Yeah, and I have Mercury ruled angles.
Yeah, and I was telling Hawk earlier that I make a crazy amount of notes. I'm super extra about this. Like,
I was very intimidated when Spencer sent me his notes.
my normal 2 pages of notes somehow bloomed into 5 this time. So I'm trying to get through all of it. But I think it's really Venus and Gemini helps me explore all these different pathways. And then the square with Virgo says, okay, now I have to distill it into essence. So I don't always use all the notes that I have, but I would rather be over prepared so I can fill space if a guest doesn't necessarily have a thought on a particular thing while also holding space. And you've been awesome today, Hawk. You really know your stuff, and I'm really, really so happy that you've been able to join us today. So thank you again for coming today. Yeah, so should we do the last 30
minutes?
I'm
so excited about this eclipse specifically.
We can get through
this eclipse is the last thing I have like a lot to say on. So I think as fast as you want to go through the stuff that happens after this, I'm totally with you. I won't be disappointed.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't have anywhere to be, but I as long as we are still keeping people's attention. So what do you got for this eclipse?
Okay. November 19, a partial lunar eclipse. Venus has perfected her trine to Uranus. Let me just make sure that's true. Yep. Okay. Yep. Mars is trining. Mars is sextiling Venus from Scorpio, right? So yes. that is still happening. This is actually, it's like a crazy configuration. It's like a lot going on. Vesta is conjoined that south node at 1 degree Sagittarius at this point. And the north node, the moon, is smack on Algol. So that's a lot of shit that I just said.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So you said a Mars sextile Venus, and then what else did we have here? Did I miss one aspect?
Vesta's down there on the south node.
I don't have Vesta on the chart here, but okay. I'll take your word for it.
I'll remember she's there. It's like, just imagine her sitting in the cup of the south node.
Yeah, and we just are coming off the Mars-Uranus opposition.
Totally. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting way to think about that too, is like maybe it's like it breaks something loose for this like greater purification. Because like what is an eclipse, right? The head of the dragon, Rahu, the north node, is going to partially swallow the moon right?
Yeah.
And the moon in traditional Hellenistic signification is fate, fortune, the body, the realm of coming to be and passing away, as our teacher says.
Yeah.
Things that we can't necessarily exert our solar will on, our bodily limitations, all of that stuff. The community too, like the things that hold us. And so I think when a node eats, right, that thing, it loses power kind of to the opposing force, right, to the sun. And the sun is like the Apollonian layover that we put on the primordial chaos of reality, right? It's like the way that we understand things, the way that we self-actualize and be like, I am actually not just part of the waving menstruum of manifestation. I am an individual node, and we're gonna go this way, you know, and then like fate like shifts, you know what I mean? It's the free will. So I think that we see an unusual balance on lunar eclipses when in that regard, like it's almost a time where like the sun gains a little bit of like power, but so close to the south node, it's a purified, rarefied, potentially a power that involves loss,
a drain, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't mean that anybody's gonna like die or anything, but like
somebody's gonna die.
Yeah, for sure. Someone will definitely die on this day. Many someone's probably.
Right. Yeah. And I love what you're saying about the power outage potentially of the south node. In addition to thinking of those nodal axes as a severed head of a dragon for the north node that is hungry, we have a severed body of that dragon that is processing. And we're going to see a number of planets, the Sun, Mercury, and Mars, all pass through this south node, where we're going to be processing and releasing old belief systems before the node changes, like before the node changes into Scorpio and Taurus. So I really think that this is definitely a culmination, an ending. I think it's important because the sun is close to that south node. I think this is a releasing of old form. I think it's releasing
what the sun is focused on,
right?
Like what that Apollonian manifestation is interested in doing.
Totally. Old desires. And that the moon is hanging out in a decan that is associated with the story of 8 and the Litai. 8 roughly translating to ruin, the Litai roughly translating to prayer or repentant prayer. So I think the caution I would give people with this is, through letting go of old forms and old desires, you may be a little bit rash about it, which is what the 8 says, and you may feel a little bit destabilized. And I think what is required is patience, maybe even if that's patience with yourself, and saying that, it's important not to lose your head Algol style, right? Because it's increasing with, you may really feel like very Algol. You may feel maybe even defensive too, because Algol is a very protective star also. It does have some significations with feminine power as well. I think there's an alternative take with Algol. Maybe you can expand on that as well with your magical practice.
I have some thoughts on that. And what you were saying too about like letting go of, I actually had some thoughts after my patron's Jupiter ritual for my Patreon, like yesterday, that like right after that, I had this lunch just last night. I had this extended thought about the process of self transformation and how it can be connected to self-harm with regards to your attitude about why you should let something go, right? As like spiritual people, like people who are involved in like the inner work, I think it's really easy to be like, oh God, I'm constantly supposed to be like letting this shit go. I'm constantly supposed to be shifting, ascending, like leveling up, like doing all this fucking changing. And I think that some of that is just reskinned. Humanity has fallen, right? Like you incarnated immediately into a situation that is bad for some reason, and now it's your job to become not bad, right? but I still believe in transformation. I still believe in shifting and changing. And I believe that there are many outmoded things that need to be consistently sloughed up. So I just want to make sure that there's like a purity of intent here, that it's like you want only slough off the things that you've decided need to go because they're bothering you, because you fucking hate them, not because you think that not because you're getting pressure, oh, I shouldn't want this, so I need to let that go. You know what I mean? Desires that don't necessarily line up with what society says you ought to want, those can stay. It doesn't have to be an act of self-harm where we're trying to force ourselves to cut it off, to remove our nature in some way that's not in line with our nature.
This is a thought that this is something I struggle with spiritual traditions sometimes, and the maybe this is my Taurus moon talking, but I have some challenges with thinking that, oh, we're just fallen, everything we're doing is bad, and we just need to be these complete ascetics. There has to be some reason why we're here, and some of it has some joy with it. It's not. I
think some of this too is what happens when you get Eastern philosophy, titrated to you through the lens, or received in a vessel that looks like Protestantism.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's totally. People are oh, okay, we're surrendering the self, right? Oh, that lines up with my belief that humanity is intrinsically fallen. We're obviously trying to get away from this place. Whereas inside of the context of Zen Buddhism, I have a half decent understanding of, and it's not, it doesn't denigrate the individual, it doesn't denigrate the human experience. It just exalts oneness as a concept, which is.
And I agree 100%. And I think that if there was a spiritual philosophy that I gravitate towards, it would be Taoism. And I think that the themes of balance are really intrinsic in that. Maybe this is my Pluto and Libra talking, but I think that to me, it's representative of natural forces of increase and decrease. And temperance, I think, is something that I aspire to personally, and that being the achemical mixture of refining. I mean, it doesn't mean that everything you desire nature isn't necessarily bad. I think that it can lead to unethical things, but it can also lead to change. You know,
but you don't want to be led around by your ass end, right? But yeah, exactly. There's plenty of other things you can do.
I think detachment is definitely important thing, but I think that can be carried to an extreme as well. If we become totally detached, then that carries its own problems, right? That carries its own quote unquote
absolutely
sins.
Exactly. Right? And in Eastern philosophy, right, it's non-dual. Zen, I'll only speak to Zen Buddhism because that's the one that I know half a thing about. It's it's literally non-dual, right? The Diamond Sutra is it's not things are one way, it should be the opposite way. You are a manifest being, you should submit to the all, right? It's neither. It's non-dual, right? It's we're breaking out of this good evil binary, and transcending it into what is, what truly is that nuanced real field of reality.
Right. And in Taoist philosophy, you're always planting the seed of its opposite when you go to an extreme. So you see that play out in nature all the time too. And I think that's actually a really good image for an eclipse, because we see something come to its fruition, or maybe even to its extreme, and the seed of the opposite is planted within the solar-lunar relationship. So if we look back on the new moon that we had here, we were planting a seed of deep, intimate union, right? And now we have its opposite planted here, its opposite coming to fruition of maybe an individuality, maybe, releasing form. Okay, because we're seeing the manifestation of the physical part of the emotional union. And I don't know, I just think this is going to be a big one as far as learning how to come to terms with what needs to be returned. right? Like that's really the
Yeah,
theme we've been
totally.
talking about with November is what needs
Like
to be returned.
put it on the altar, like, right? Like
Yeah.
that's like I'm seeing this really spiritual side to this transit, especially like Vesta on the south node really like gives me
Yeah.
this image of the sacred, like the sacred fire tenders, right?
Hmm.
Feeding things into the fire, right? Because it's
Yeah.
like this purifying nature of the south node, and the like Vesta's priestesses are like not afraid of that, of the south node like taking something away, right? And it's like they'll accept it, you know what I mean? It doesn't have
Well,
to be this struggle.
and in Eastern astrology or in like Jyotisha, they really like the South Node. They're like, this is,
Right, because
I
it's
don't know if it's
purifying.
right. They're like, this isn't bad. Like they've totally flipped the script in evolutionary astrology, where like, oh, you have to grow towards your North
You're
Node.
supposed to get away from it, right?
Right.
Like, and yeah,
So think
that's
about
my
that.
biggest
That
complaint with
that
it,
is
I
your,
think.
South Node is releasing attachment, and I think that's part of the Zen Buddhist kind of philosophy as well, or the, you know, I don't know, some of the other spiritual practices is, you can be in the world but not of it. You can still participate in the bodies without being ruled by it, and that's where the balance comes in, right? I think
Yeah,
that maybe some of the themes that we see here too is that how do we be incarnated in a body without having it have complete power over us, because we have will, because we have consciousness, because we are eternal spirit souls, and that balance is going to be really uh, highlighted at this eclipse. So
totally.
again, another just practical thing: don't charge your crystals on eclipses. Like, I mean, stuff like that. I don't. Uh, I always close shop when eclipses happen. I close the blinds and, like, I'm just like, do my rituals around that period of time, and I try not to do too many things on those days. Do you have anything like this that you do? Any ritual practice for eclipses?
Yes, I do. I take a slightly I'm my spiritual practice is very much like moving with the times.
Yeah.
So like as like moments in time occur, like my practice is to sit with in devotion and intimacy, like with the moment, basically.
Mm-hmm.
That's like basically the whole thing. Um, uh, and like I think of like my magical practice as like training me to be in greater intimacy with the present moment.
Yeah.
And so when things like this happen that are sort of like objectively scary, as people find eclipses, and definitely they can represent disruptions, I think it's not a good time to try and manifest your will onto the world, because it's an
Right.
uncontrolled power and God knows what form it will take.
Sure.
But I do tend to sit softly with it. And I think this one, I feel like, like I'll also bathe myself in salt regularly to try and like bring
Definitely.
in
I do that too.
some of that purification.
Mm.
I'm seeing like the sun coming into, like, about to cross the south node, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's like Vesta is like preparing almost this space for us to like, when we're gonna like cross and like have to like and like release something
Right.
of the
Right.
self, and like something is going to be born out of that. So yeah, I just devotional practice. I wouldn't ask if you're, especially if you're a beginner. If you're not a beginner, you can ignore what I'm saying, obviously. But but if you're a beginner, like I wouldn't ask for anything on an
Mm-hmm.
eclipse except for just like gentle awareness and to be nice to you about it.
Yeah, and and I really, a part of this, the host of this moon is that Venus that's making the trine to
Yeah,
Uranus too.
let's talk
So
about that.
just doing something new, and like really like shaking it up like Venusian ways. What do you think about that? If
So
we bring that into the conversation?
this is the Athena leaps out of Zeus's head moment to me. Like
Okay.
that, I'm really seeing that. Because yeah, she's in Capricorn, like Hephaestus, right?
Hmm.
Is this I know Zachary is gonna might have an opinion about whether Hephaestus can be Mars in Scorpio, and there are good counter arguments for it, but just for the sake of this narrative, we're going for it, right? Like Hephaestus, right, strikes the head of Zeus in this sextile to Venus, and then she leaps right like out of his head, springs forth fully formed. Like I really like I feel that. And her aegis, right, Athena's shield bears what? The head of a Gorgon. And the moon is conjoined algol. Yeah, so I feel like there's definitely this Athena Medusa dynamic happening here. Yeah, let's just talk about that for a second, because there's a lot of like confusing stuff around this where it's like, why did Athena help Perseus kill Medusa? Like, why did that happen? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, my understanding is the basic, and you feel free to add or correct or anything, but so Medusa was a priestess in Hera's temple or Athena's temple?
Yeah, so she was I think she was occupying Athena's temple at that moment. Yeah.
Okay. And then she was raped basically, right? By
assaulted
by Poseidon?
Yes, I also think it's Poseidon. I have a similar question mark on that detail, but I'm sorry, Poseidon, if we're wrong.
And then she got blamed by Athena or whoever the goddess his temple was.
I think it's definitely Athena's temple.
Okay. And then Athena, like her wrath, right, was to turn her into this monster and this Gorgon. Right. So you can even see like, Medusa being a victim on this on some level here too. But then also becoming empowered, like her wrath was like she would turn people into stone. Like anyone who would gaze upon her would be turned to stone. And she has symbols with snakes and transformation and with healing and things like that.
Snakes are a common symbol. They've been at least pinned in recent years to Scorpio.
And I wonder too, like there's a bit of a more of a feminist perspective on the myth where maybe Athena gave her this gift to protect her from like being ravaged.
I hear that. That's definitely that's a thing. I mean, like that's a myth that's entered the collective consciousness, is that interpretation. And I see it in my head, right, where it's like Medusa is like crouched down on the floor of Athena's temple, and Athena like wraps like her like owl wings right around her in protection, right, and transfigures her like at her request. You know what I mean? And so that's definitely one myth to think with while we're experiencing this transit. And then there's this, so I think that's really interesting.
Gabe is talking about that this was Ovid's version, which is Roman.
Exactly. There's a second one, right? This may be what you're referring to, which is that she was always a Gorgon. Like she was born a Gorgon. Like none of this transfiguration happened at all. And Athena crosses paths with Medusa in the moment when she helps Perseus behead her. Yeah,
it's fascinating that just all the different context for the myths definitely colors the experience of it. And that's something I've definitely found in my Deccan webinar research, is that there's so many different lenses to view all these symbols through.
Totally.
And you really have to understand.
Story weaved.
Right. Yeah. You have to understand the context.
Turning the jewel a different way.
And I wonder if the point that Gabe is making about the Roman context is that it was definitely a little bit more of a patriarchal, take on that myth as well. And I wonder if there is a more balanced take with other source texts or things like that. So I'd be curious to hear Gabe's thoughts on that as well. But
Cliff brought up something that I is actually in my notes. That like a severing of both the destructive relationship from one generation to the next, which rectifies Zeus's relationship with his father. But the bit that I'm catching on here is, so here we have a long-term thinking daughter of Zeus manifesting as Venus in Capricorn.
Interesting.
I love that about her being long thinking, because with aside from like being very proficient in war, Venus, Athena is extremely wise. She's like the wisest of them all. And she's like sought after for her wisdom. And so I like this inside the structure of Saturn's sign, because Athena is like not really interested in actually going against the order of the Olympians, as far as I know. She's just like, she is like an exactor of will. There's this interesting dynamic where it's like she's not, if we see Medusa as this like feminist figure, right? Athena, right, helped Perseus like kill her, right? And it's because like she doesn't hold these, she doesn't have an ideological alignment towards the liberation of Medusa, right? Perseus is her guy, like it's one of her chosen humans, her heroes, right? So and Perseus has a long-term devotional relationship to her, right? They have like an agreement. He gets sent on a suicide mission by the king to bring back Medusa's head. Like the king is like, go out and kill Medusa. I'm gonna stay here and try and fuck your mom, literally. And so Athena is like, all right, bro, we're gonna help you out in this experience. And so I think we see her acting inside of the context of like the great narrative that we exist in. Like we kind of exist in this myth structure, right? Where like we have the great heroes and we have like Zeus and like all this stuff. She's an agent of that, right? She's assisting the heroes. She enforces wisdom, right? The distilled value, right, of knowledge.
Well, isn't it interesting
it's just like
too?
an interesting dynamic, because it's like we want to make her a feminist figure, right? As being like a woman doing a man's thing, you know what I mean?
Right.
But it's like she almost doesn't care about that. Like she just doesn't really care about that.
So Big Bad Biff, that's Cliff, right?
Yeah, Cliff.
Saying that there's a prophecy that if she was born a male, she was to overthrow Zeus. And you know you can't have Zeus being overthrown. And then Gabe is bringing in a follow-up saying, one maybe more Platonic take would be that since Gorgons, while monstrous, are also apotropaic in general, basically monsters that protect people from other monsters.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And you know, one thing that was coming up when you were talking about Athena was I feel like the puppet master of this whole drama, right? She turned Medusa into the Gorgon, but then also facilitated Perseus's slaying of the Gorgon.
Yeah,
right?
if you take it to be like she did the first thing, then yeah, for sure.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's just a thing where like you're like, oh my gosh, like you're a victim and I will protect you. But then there's also like, but also this is my dude. Like, sorry.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? It's not like, it's like she's not ideologically aligning one way.
And that's like common with myth too. There isn't, I don't think that they, in Greek mythology or even the Romanized versions, that there was this attachment to like black or white thinking or like moralistic. Their way of viewing morals was much more gray. You know, there was a lot of gray area with that. And I think that we see that come out in a lot of these myths, that they're very human. You know, it's not like this, like,
totally.
oh, you have to be this deified version or idealized version, but
right. Like they have wills of their own. They have wills of their own that like are unique in their personality. Like, I don't know. It's like, I'm so surprised every time I interface with Athena.
Yeah.
She's so like upstanding, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't really quite know how to say it, but it feels like her working inside of Capricorn as Venus in Capricorn really feels like almost like an enforcement of order, right. In some way.
Well, Gabe is adding, says, so the whole Perseus beheading Medusa with Athena's help is more a matter of the god helping the hero use the apotropaic power of Medusa as if it emanates from Athena to Perseus.
Yeah, I like that. I love that. And I love that for a greater eclipse thing too, right? Because it's like we have her with her shield, right? Like the imagery of her wielding the, because there's a beheading, right? It's like it's on Algol, it's on like Rahu, right? Like Rahu can join Algol as this double header of beheadedness, right? Like, because like Rahu is the head without a tail, without a body, and Algol is obviously like the head of the Gorgon. It's literally like Medusa.
All right, so I want you to return the potty break favor here and expand on that. And if there's questions from the chat, maybe there are things that they can add to this story. If people have experiences with their lunar eclipse, and I will be back in 1 second. Sound good?
Totally. Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, Zachary says, I love the way you're talking about this because I see it in my devotional practice where the gods are just not interested in our morals about things. Yes, exactly. And I don't want it to seem like I'm not pro-feminism by saying this about Athena, a deity that I work with. I was actually surprised to like learn this about her. I was really expecting to get this vibe off of her that was more because I sort of saw her as like the protector of Medusa, like that kind of vibe. But that's just something that she did because it was like morally right. You know what I mean? She's not going to get like slotted into. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Zachary says, thinking of the story of Perseus being a devotee of Athena and her helping him with the issue he's trying to solve. And I think we can see that like I want to embody that Perseus role, right? Not in that I would have beheaded Medusa, but like I kind of, if we see them all as not having like individual will and like operating as like this like story tapestry. I don't know, there's also this really interesting thought too, where it's like, because we're eating the moon, we're like losing fate circumstances, taking this action, right, of like beheading, that's like it's like an act of will, but the act of will is a severing, right? Because it's solar, but it's the sun approaching the south node, and we'd have the double header beheading imagery. But with Venus trining Uranus, it's like, it's from this place of like wisdom. And yeah, I also love the story of Perseus being a devotee of Athena. This really changed for me understanding what it means to be patroned by a god, right? Until I was actually listening to Circe, which is an amazing book. I was listening to it on tape about the story of Circe. Definitely check that out if you're a fan of Greek mythology. Yeah, just the experience of being patroned by a deity. Like they're walking with you for your entire life, basically. Like it's like you're their guy. One of their emissaries on earth, one of their pawns. And I say that in not a derogatory way. Like, I just mean like you're like one of their pieces that they're able to move because you've consensually entered into this agreement. Like if Athena has a will to enact on earth, you have consented, right? To be like, yeah, you can think about me as a thing you can move, right? Nice. Yeah, welcome back, Spencer.
All right, yeah, I'm back. This is a marathon one.
It's such a relief, right? You're just like, phew.
Yeah, it's so good. So like, I love this, and I'm not ashamed that this one's going long because, you know, Hawk, one of the things I like about talking with you is you're really knowledgeable about the myth and the fixed stars, and we get to kind of nerd out on some of the stories, and that's kind of part of the reason this is going longer today, because I think we're just really excited about sharing these stories. And yeah, hopefully totally. It's more of like a seminar than just a forecast, I think, here, right?
Yeah, definitely. So, I'm definitely feeling like the ability to like let myth like come through in this. Really
I love it. That's some of my favorite parts of astrology is being able to connect the stories and being able to see some of those archetypal themes playing out just through the, I don't know, interesting interplay of, you know, human experience. You know, it's really cool. Okay, so we feel like we've got a pretty good experience with the full moon eclipse. I guess my final thought on that is that the Liti are the women that follow the old women that follow behind 8, which is Ruin, who was very hasty, offering up repentant prayers. So if you do end up losing your head, or like, you know, getting angry or doing something rash, the power of prayer, the power of acceptance can help you through this period of time. I think that's really important to keep in mind when you're going through this eclipse energy.
I love that too. And we're talking about such a morally ambiguous decision as like beheading Medusa, right? It's like sometimes you do things that aren't actually necessarily good at all, and you're not stoked on it.
For sure. This eclipse has potential to be very spicy, where we could just, you know, lose ourselves and not be in control. And I think that if we know going into it that we have that potential, and we double down on our meditative practices that help keep us in balance and in equilibrium, exactly. I think that's really the key.
There's so much here if we turn to the spiritual for this, I think. Absolutely. I don't know what the hell it's going to be like manifesting outside on reality. I'll be interested to see. But.
Well, and I love your salt bath practice, because
God, it really helps. Yeah, and Caitlin Kopic of Sphere and Sundry has a
Right.
great guide for what you ought to do bodily and spiritually for eclipses, and like a nice way to like remediate eclipses. So if you just Google Sphere and Sundry eclipse remediation, it'll for sure come up.
Absolutely. Do your Rahu or Ketu ritual potentially. And you know the other thing about the salt is it just helps these energies not stick to you. I think that that's the real benefit of the salt is
And it's that
it.
Scorpio thing. It's like decomposes it faster.
Yeah,
Like when you want to rot down a corpse, like you
totally.
cover it in salt.
There you go. There you go. All right. So moving on from the eclipse on the 19th.
Phew.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
I
we
was
got
really excited about that one. I had a lot to like get
deep
out.
dives here. So if we go to the 20th of November, we do see a square between Mercury and Jupiter. So this is, you know, interesting because we had the trine at the very beginning of the month between these two planets, and now Mercury has moved far enough that we're seeing that same energy, but in square form, but just from a completely different house. So, you know, some things that may have been functioning when Mercury was moving through Libra may be a little bit more difficult. The conversations get a little bit more intense, a little bit more emotional. The gloves come off potentially, and we have to get to the core of something, and that could be a little painful sometimes, right?
Big picture stuff too, like talking, like having hard combos about big picture shit. Like if
Yeah,
this were to transpire in a relationship, right? This would be like a is where we're going actually working talk. Like, you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah, for
Um,
sure. Trying to untie those karmic knots that we were talking about
yeah.
with Jupiter in Aquarius. One other
Wait.
note I put in there was crude sentiments with Mercury in this decan, or sewer thoughts, like so, like your brain going to like the deepest, darkest, you know, corners, but for the purpose of releasing and for the purpose of embracing the unknown and moving out into the new territory.
Right. Hermes Cathanios might be a helpful deity to walk with as
Yeah,
he makes this transit.
love that. I love it. When we move forward
One
to the, go
one
ahead.
other quick thing about a square,
Yeah.
especially when a benefic is involved. I know we don't usually talk about remediating specific aspects, but I have a thing about remediating squares, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's no good if you're two people and you're moving like this, right? What you need to
Right.
do is to find a third point, right, in the distance to fix on, and then you become like
Nice.
a team, like a chariot team, right, pulling something. So if that relationship talk happens, throw
Right.
the spear, find the point in the direction, find the point like on the horizon where you're both trying to pull the cart towards.
And in this case, what would you say that that point is?
Well, I think it's quite individual, and it should be discerned by meditating on what brings you the most meaning in life. And it's classic Sag rising answer.
There you go. I'll take it. If we move forward to the next day, we have just a sextile between Mercury and Pluto. So maybe after the difficult conversation with Jupiter, we have some sort of unearthing of corruption that helps us move forward and helps us resystemize on some level. And then I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that one here. But once we get to the 21st, the sun is going to move into Sagittarius. So this is a big moment where we're getting the solar ingress into Sagittarius here. It's leaving Mars's house. It's moving into Jupiter's domain. It's also, and this is important, right as the sun moves into Sagittarius, the heliacal rise of Mars happens. So the sun conjoins the south node. Mars rises from the beams and is visible again. And this is a phasis moment. This is what Schmidt calls phasis, where it's an omen that speaks. What's that?
I said, tell me about that. The
Yeah,
phasis
so the
moment.
phasis moment is an omen that speaks louder than some other things potentially. So I went back and did some research on the heliacal risings of Saturn, Mars, and things like that. With Saturn's, there was a whole bunch of stuff around the January 6th stuff when you had the Cazimi,
Right.
and then charges were filed when Saturn became visible. When Saturn made its heliacal setting, that's when we had the whole storming of the Capitol type of thing. There was all sorts of connections with that. And I think at Mars, can give us a sense of what are some of the new conflicts potentially that will require us to be warriors, that will require us to utilize the positive side of Mars, the courage, the listening skills, the ability to go towards a goal and things of that nature. And I want everybody to kind of think back to what seed was planted on October the 8th when Mars was at 15 degrees of Libra. And in both of those planets were either in detriment or in fall. And whatever was planted there, you're going to see some kind of realization of that, some beginning that becomes visible. And it's very powerful, Mars. I was talking to another astrologer that thought this would be like war happening, and I was like, I'm not going to warmonger, but I do think that
like I'm not ready to go there.
No, I'm not ready to go there either. But I do think that there's a lot of really. Let's just go from a bigger picture perspective. There's a lot of things happening in America around voting rights, around body rights, around the way that we distribute resources and land, as you were talking about earlier. And there's been kind of this gridlock for a lot of it because we have this.
It does feel that way.
Yeah, we have a split Congress.
The Senate and
right?
Yeah, with Congress.
Exactly. So I think that there may be some kind of moment where, because remember, second decan Libra was about contracts and oaths and agreements, and I think we were, unfortunately, that was a moment where whatever contract we're trying to commit to, is not going to work. And I know that there's some people that were afraid that we're going to have a government shutdown or something, and they actually did. They kicked that can down the road to the eclipse.
Oh God!
Like it was supposed to be on that new moon or whatever, but then they kicked it down the can to the eclipse. So we'll see. But I do think that whatever conflicts that you are dealing with or martial types of things are going to become visible. Like you're going to know what you're going to need to fight for when Mars makes its heliacal rise. And I just think that this is something that astrologers need to pay attention to quite a bit more. Is the synodic appearances of planets, because I found time and time again that it really important moments happen during these heliacal risings and settings and whatnot.
I like that we mentioned like the protracted state of Congress, because it's like with him still in that square to Saturn, it's like two malefic forces that both are in their dignity, like they both are resourced. Right. Just like gridlocked.
Totally. And with the square of Saturn and Mars, like you were saying, like it's rock in a hard place, It's like
the rock is on fire.
And unstoppable force meets an immovable object. So
right. That's a good way to put it, actually.
So another thing that I just wanted to cover as we move forward here, the Sun moving into Sagittarius 1. We didn't really get too deep into that, but that is called swiftness in Book T and Book of Thoth. The daimon associated with it is loimos. We talked about that with the plague. It was a daimon of plague, so contagious, whether enthusiasm or contagious dogma or propaganda. It could be both. That's something to keep in mind with this phase of Sagittarius. This is a liberated spirit. Right.
I was going to say that Sagittarius can be a little, when you mentioned war, I was like, it can be a little bit jingoistic up in Sagittarius, just because Jupiter, right, is just like holds itself in a very positive light, right?
Right. Very much so. Like arrogance is a downside of it. It's
sure.
It's kind of like I said it, so I'm going to stick to it kind of thing.
Yeah.
Rather than Mercury's signs would say, well, what about this? Let's question this. Let's cast this into doubt. Jupiter is very much saying, I know, so It must be right. So be careful of that.
About it coming straight out the gate onto the South Node?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be really, really important to release that I know energy and ask questions. I think that we could run into a lot of problems if we really try to create an identity or some kind of power play around a belief system that is no longer vital. I think that we to be able to move forward with new structuring, we have to release old Jupiterian beliefs. Like, so
And I've
that,
just been getting that from Jupiter in Saturn sign, like
right.
literally the entire transit. So I love that there's this opportunity to really put your money where your mouth is on it. Like it's like a culminating one
Yes,
for that. I can't
absolutely.
emphasize enough the importance of like taking a spiritual approach to transits to the South Node. It can be
Mm,
really hard otherwise. It like feels like someone's like taking something from you, like
right.
on a spiritual level. So I feel like spending a lot of time just like in contemplation, like approaching it from a place of like of co-creation with the universe, where you're just like, what is it? What is it? What are we cleansing? Like let me in on the secret, and like maybe I'll help. Like, you know what I mean? Like that kind of, like
Yeah.
you're trying to help it do its job.
And you have to become more receptive because your personal will might not be as strong at this period. And like
Yeah.
coming to terms with the fact that, again, sometimes energy comes into this dimension or plane of existence and sometimes it has to leave.
Yeah.
If it didn't leave, it would get stagnant and we would be stuck, and that would
We
lead
would
to
hate
its,
it here.
yeah, we wouldn't like it. So accepting change, I think, is a really important thing with the South Node too, and accepting that we have to live into the answers, and we don't always have to have it all figured out right away either. I
Yeah,
think
I think
that's
that's a
been
great point.
seeing
That
things from
addition of
multiple
like
perspectives.
it's not about your will. It's not about like what you think. Even what I just said, it's not about like, oh, like you have to like sit down and do your spiritual practice during this time. It's still like active. There's this like maybe like a let go and let God value to this
Absolutely.
moment.
And that brings us forward to Mercury moving into Sagittarius. So this is happening around the 24th. Now this is where it gets a little hairy. I think the sun is probably okay in Sagittarius. It's got triplicity rulership and stuff like that. But Mercury, it's in Jupiter's house, which Mercury genuinely likes to destabilize and to question and to get all the information and all these different perspectives and as a go-between. Whereas Jupiter likes bringing order. Jupiter likes saying, "I already know all this." And when Mercury's there, it's a very uncomfortable position for Mercury. But Mercury is also going to be hanging out with the South Node too. So I would say it's important to not spout off a belief system that, again, could have outlived its time. I think that's something I would be really careful of. I wrote down strong opinions, dogma, propaganda.
Mhm.
Very important to kind of release those types of things and ask questions rather than make declarative statements.
Yeah, totally. I think that
Go ahead.
I love Mercury in Sagittarius personally.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite Mercury placements. Everything that you just said is absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this is an additional angle, which is that like, and especially inside the context of national values, religious values, that kind of thing, like institutional values, like Mercury in Sagittarius is the trickster. You know what I mean? Because he's Jupiterian. He's talking, he's laughing, he's switching sides. He's not trying to communicate something to you in a way that you necessarily understand, right? He's just like, I'm here, now I'm here. I'm running circles around this thing because I'm trying to illustrate a point. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? I'm using a bunch of individual pieces of mercurial dot work to point at something that's too big to hold, right? Yeah, I have this quote where it's like he walks backwards into the ritual room screaming, which is from the Emerald. So there's like, I cannot remember what the context of this is, but there was a religious practice, right, where like part of the rite is this reversal, this like inversus energy, where it's like we invite the trickster in because otherwise we acknowledge he's going to wreak havoc on us. We're going to get got if we don't invite him. So he like walks into like this one guy, right, like backs up into the ritual room, just like howling, like doing something completely contrary to the Jupiterian order of what's supposed to be happening here in this like, you know, like spiritual ritual.
And there's other ways of thinking about a planet in its exile where it's just doing things in a contrary way to maybe the expectation, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Right?
I love that.
So maybe there's a way to come to I don't know, consensus or questioning, but through sharing your opinion or sharing your passion or your enthusiasm with people. Now, I wanted to point out that on November 25th in America, this is a Thanksgiving or Turkey Day, as I like to call it. But all of these South Node Sagittarius aspects are happening on a holiday where generally we get together with family members that we don't normally see and we spout off opinions about random things. So I guess I would just be careful if you're sitting around some sort of celebratory table. And, we can talk about whether, that holiday is, I don't know. I like to eat, so I've generally liked that holiday. But again, it's definitely has, it's a mixed bag ethically, for sure. But I think that the core of getting together with a family or whatever you consider family, when you're in that space, I think that just holding space for other people is important.
Yeah, that's an interesting letting the dynamism of Mercury's ability to hold big stuff too.
Right.
I'm actually thinking about K2 is like cleaning your mouth, right, to make sure that those things don't necessarily come out to you don't tell grandma that like right. you actually think that her opinions about society are complete garbage at the wrong moment, in a moment where she might not receive it.
Well, and I think that, when she's got a mouthful and she's going to choke on it.
Not that grandma couldn't do better. Like, we want to make grandma do better, but
Right. I think it's important to recognize that. I don't know how to explain this in a way that would be the way to explain it, but I think that when we have family members, we have a unique connection with those folks where we may be able to test out some new ways of thinking with people that hopefully will love us unconditionally. I mean, that's like the ideal.
Nice. Like, it has like a big, it has like a big container.
Yeah. And I think that I've tried to do this with people that I have in my family where I've been trying to maybe share a more progressive perspective and hopefully doing it in a way that instead of as accusatory is more calling in versus calling out. I guess that would be the way I would think about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there is a mechanism by which opinions change that involves like, oh, what's the word that I'm looking for? Like whatever those little like trash gathering cells are, like, you want to be able to like kind of surround them with like your ideology to let them like, but in a way that they're not registering necessarily as an attack, so that they can like potentially like absorb some of the information. Not that active conflict when it comes to matters like of such import isn't like a completely valid approach. And I think that sometimes it does, even if it doesn't work in the moment, like that attack can plant a seed that comes to fruition later.
Yeah. And another thought when you were saying that is just that I think that one of the things that may be a potential pitfall is that if you have a disagreement about a belief, that it becomes lumped into, I disagree with everything about you type of thing.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
It compresses the nuance.
Right. And maybe the exercise is to say we can disagree on certain things without subjugating, I don't know if that's the right word, each other's humanity or the things that we do connect on, and finding ways to connect in ways that you agree on, and then agreeing to disagree, or educating one another to be able to make a change on the things that need to change.
Yeah, there are definitely some points that like are a bridge too far for me to be like accepting and communicative, but especially when it comes to like things like, just I won't give examples. I mean, y'all like, but like, I don't really see that being what's going on here, because we have that Mars Venus sextile. You know what I mean? This isn't like, this isn't a blowout drag out with grandma.
No,
as far as I can tell, there's the square from the moon, right, to Mars. Moon, so that it could, that's a little bit, but it's fast moving.
Square
right?
with Uranus.
Yeah, but that's moving fast, so it's like happening, and then
The
like
only thing I could see happening with this Leo moon, which I think is a good moon for a party, you know, if you want to have a good time,
fuck. As a Leo
it
moon, I couldn't agree more.
right. So I think that's great for this day. I would also say though that if you do get into philosophical conversations with family members that you don't see very often that may not share your values, it could be pretty easy to get into the point where you have a moment where you're like, the Leo ness kicks in. You're like, well, I said it and I'm going to stand by it type of thing. And that could
Right.
lead to a conflict. And with the moon Mars kind of thing, that I would say it would be very easy to get fixed in a position and then have the pride take over and the pride kick in where you want to save face. You know what I'm saying? Where that is a
Right.
big, I think that's a big Leo thing. As a Leo ascendant, losing face is very, very difficult.
My
And
Sagittarius too, I think. I mean, I'm a Sag rising. This is a self drag. Like, it's
yeah,
like the impression people have of you when it enters a negative zone is like kind of unbearable. I feel like for a Jupiter person too.
totally. And one of the, I've had some Leo or some Scorpio rising people in my life that I had some real conflicts with because when we disagreed on something, what they wanted was a complete evisceration of like you, you know, and for a Leo person, that's just not possible. You have to allow them to like go lick their wounds, consider it, and if they give an apology, that's already a big step. You know what I'm saying? Rather than like saying, "Well, you have to grovel." Like that's something that a Leo person is never going to do. Like we don't grovel. We're the king, so we're not going to be groveling. And I
Trying
think
to
that if you
learn this about. I have
right
a
if
partner with a Leo still. I'm like
well if
interesting
and if
information.
you understand this about us and give us some space, that can lead to a much better outcome than if you say, well, I expect you to be to lower you to your knees right
Right.
now on
Totally.
this opinion. And I think that that could be something when you're interacting with people that this moon and this Mars could be saying to one another is, you know, you may have to not go for the entire quote unquote victory if you're dealing with
Yeah.
someone who has something different than you.
Because Mars and Scorpio is proud too, you know. So it's like
Exactly.
two proud people who are like not you're not getting anywhere.
Exactly. And I'm willing to admit that I'm wrong if you give me some space to like
Yeah. Right.
think
I have
about
to
it,
like
like
relax my
internalize
energy
it.
pattern,
Right.
which was being held in the like I am fucking right like
Right. Exactly.
configuration. Like it has to
Exactly.
like the armor has to fall and like clatter to the floor. And then I'm like, ah shit.
Yeah.
I was wrong.
And with all like I have a Taurus moon, so the Taurus says I have to feel this in my body first. Just let me feel this first. And
Mm-hmm.
like, oh yeah, you're right.
Right,
And
like let
then
the
like
escalation decrease and like all
well,
that good stuff.
and the Virgo planets, I have Virgo planets, so it's like I've already beat myself to death with some of this stuff. So, like, but again, for the Leo folks out there, it is important to sometimes back off a position. You know, just because you said it doesn't mean that it's right. You don't have to look around and be like, well, who are you? Who are you? You can't possibly be talking to me. That's a look that Leo, placements have is well, you possibly can't be talking to me. I think that if you want some change, the way to deal with a Leo moon here is to do it with a certain level of dignity and allow for a
Right,
certain
like
level
a
of dignity.
forward dignity.
Exactly. And that doesn't mean that you can't get to the core of an issue. There has to be some space for that. And I think if you go into your holiday season with a little bit of space and understanding for maybe even saving some face, that I think you will have a better result than if you go for the entire, I don't know, touchdown like
Go for
of
the
public
jugular.
opinion. The jugular. There you go. Much better for Mars and Scorpio here. Okay, so that's Thanksgiving in America. Always an interesting holiday. Thanksgiving for me with my family was always weird because I'm sort of I don't know, an outlier in my family. I didn't always agree
Right.
with everything that they said, and I was opinionated, so I would challenge people about their views, and especially if they were saying things that I didn't think was very nice or progressive, and um, but I also had to have empathy too,
Yeah.
and realize that if I really attacked people, they would just shut down. They wouldn't be receptive to me anymore. So
Right.
again, that's how you know that you are opening people up by acknowledging their humanity within that
Yeah.
conflict.
That's a tough one, the relationship to
It
aggression,
is, man. I'll tell
especially
you.
when it comes to things that are truly make you angry. It's like,
Yeah,
how much of that?
absolutely.
It's a toughie. I'm puzzling through that one right now, actually, just in life.
Well, I'll tell you. That leads us to a Mercury Cazimi. So here's what I'm thinking happens. You have an interesting conversation with Uncle Ralph at the dinner table, and maybe he goes back, hopefully, and he starts to think about what you said, and has a Mercury Cazimi moment about maybe a new belief system. Or you do. Maybe you have a nice conversation with one of your relatives that totally changes your perspective on something. And then a few days later, you're considering this and you have a Mercury Cazimi moment where there is some kind of connection and awareness of a new belief, potentially a new enthusiasm. Maybe you have a good conversation with relatives that where you get inspired to do something, or with friends, if you have Friendsgiving or whatever it is. That could be something that you experience as well. What do you think about this Cazimi moment here on the 28th of November?
Mind blown definitely is coming to mind as like a key phrase.
Yeah.
Just to explain, I mean, I saw somebody saying that we had some beginners in the audience. Do you want to explain? I can explain what a Cazimi is real quick.
Go ahead.
Basically, as a planet begins to approach the sun, it's all about visibility in the way that we understand like what's happening to a planet, right? So as a planet begins to approach the sun, it gets less and less visible. It gets blown out, right? Because the sun is bright as fuck. And then there's a moment in the middle where, so it's seen as decreasing in strength, right, as that happens, or ability to emit. And then there's a point in the middle where the planet enters, Cazimi, I think means literally like is like the heart of the sun, right? So we kind of can see it as the solar god, right, presses his seal upon the planet, like imprints it with his dignity and glory. And it's kind of like a communion between the two of them, where it's like, you can almost think about Mercury as like entering the chamber of the sun, and they have their like sacred congress that like none of us can perceive. And like the sun exchanges his wisdom for Mercury's experience, having gone around an entire synodic cycle.
A rebirth in the furnace, right?
Exactly. It's like those when you're coming out, right? There's definitely like now you're all the way in, and you get that full on purification moment.
Right.
God, that's such a theme for this month.
Yeah, so great. And so the weakness of Mercury is going, it's going to get steamy. But I think that this may be an enlightened moment of an awareness of purpose, an awareness of
nice,
right, an awareness of what is going to light the flames of passion for you to move towards a specific goal. One of the things that they talked about with this decan of Sagittarius was, because it's associated with a daimon of plagues, that you need to have your own specific goal so that you don't become a host for like the viral goals of someone else, right? So it's easy to become a vehicle for someone else's vision if you don't have a clarity about your own. So this may be the clarity moment of what your vision is, right? And how you can actually start to take action and use your skills, aka Mercury, to enact that in the real world or the physical world or whatever it is. Okay.
I just want to real quick
ahead.
just touch on that idea again of like Mercury in Sagittarius describing the indescribable. Like when you're trying to like think about a black hole, right? Like you need Mercury in Sagittarius for that job. Mercury in Gemini can't quite like cover it, right? Because there's no like discrete concept that we can really quite actually put our finger on. You need someone who isn't necessarily who that's not their thing. Their thing is the big thing. And I feel like when it comes to Cazimi, right, that ability gets turned to its highest purpose.
I love it. I'm here for it. I'm ready. And as we were saying before, this superior conjunction of Mercury and the Sun potentially could be, Hermes visiting Olympus, getting a divine download, really getting that like, okay, that's my purpose. That's from my higher self, or however you want to view it.
Some Mercury ruled risings, like look out for that. Definitely try and align yourself with Mercury in that moment.
And then on the 29th, and we're almost done here, folks. You all are super troopers. So thank you for hanging with us today. We have a Mars Neptune trine that we're seeing here. I think you're going to set the record for longest live stream, Hawk.
So sorry.
No, it's awesome. I'm here like for this. It. So there's our trine between Mars and Neptune. There's some Crusader action with this combination. There is a potential also release, though. The third decan of Pisces has to do with potentially sacrifice for a greater cause, like a crusade or a martyrdom. And I'm thinking like maybe Mars is saying, okay, it's time to let go of that martyr consciousness, or like let go of some old habits that are keeping you in bondage to this, I don't know, this vision or something like that, severing old illusions.
Like that. I really like that as a crusade, as like a moral crusade.
Right. Like some kind of action that you're taking that is more divinely inspired rather than materially inspired, I think could be another thing too. And then on the 30th, this is the point in my notes, my 5 pages of notes, where I was like, oh, okay. I wrote sextile o'clock because there's, and I said it's sexy time. So I was getting a little punchy. The 30th is sexy time here, everybody. We've got
after all that, honestly, thank God.
Right? So maybe that's what I think people should just do. Go have some sexy times after all this. So there's a sex in Mercury and Saturn that day at 8 degrees, and then Venus sextiles Neptune at 20 degrees of Capricorn and Pisces, and then the Sun is sextiling Saturn on that day as well, from Sagittarius to Capricorn. And sextiles generally are beneficial, like having some kind of help. They're of the nature of Venus, so maybe receiving some good fortune. And this is setting up Neptune stationing direct on the 1st of December.
With all these sextiles involving Saturn, it could be a fun time to play with restraints.
Whoa, there you go. Handcuffs.
Just saying. Just saying.
So that's the point of the show that we're at here. The sexy time of the final days of November. You heard it here first on the Spencer Michaud Astrology Podcast. Hey, we did it. We got through all the aspects of the month 3 hours later. All right.
I'm glad I didn't have anything else on for today.
So,
thank you guys in the chat. You guys have been so fun and active and engaging. Gabe, Abraham.
Yeah, this is a great
Kira,
chat.
For sure.
Really
Zachary.
Awesome. A whole new set of folks in here that I'm super excited to see, who are pretty big, like heavyweights, astrological heavyweights. I'm really, I've really learned a lot from people in the chat today. So thank you for stopping by.
It's an all-star cast in the chat.
Let's tie a bow on this. I like to do an I-Ching reading at the end of each live stream to give sort of the essence of either the new or the full moon, or the lunations or the aspects of the month. So I got the hexagram number 47, which roughly translates to exhaustion, oppression, being restricted. Sound familiar, Mars Saturn? Hardship, adversity, dried up, impasse. And it's moving to number 59, which roughly translates to dispersion, disillusion, ridding of egotism, bringing people together through a common cause, melting the ice and eliminating obstacles within the self. And there's 2 changing lines here. Line number 4 says, he comes slowly, oppressed in a golden carriage, humiliation, but it will not end. So this to me talks about, I think this is really about, we're being held back on some level from some of the interpretations said you were being held back by doing the right thing due to our social circumstances and connections. So it's like they gave an example in the book I like by Jack M. Balkin, which is an I-Ching interpretation. Really enjoy that book. It talks about potentially let's say that you are affluent and you know that you need to contribute to the less fortunate, but you're getting social pressure from your social elite rich friends that stop you from doing it or something like that. Does that make sense? That was one example that he gave in this book, where there's the right thing to do, but you have to risk disapproval from your peers to
And
be able to do it.
I want to connect that back to the comment to the thought about don't let go of things, motivate, like purify your intention for letting things go, for ascending, for like doing all that. Like, don't let it be out of that self.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? That
it
being
works with the
controlled by
South
external
Node.
narratives.
Yeah, it works with the South Node and all these planets saying, hey, release that old belief. You don't have to follow that old narrative anymore or
Yeah, like that's
stick
not
to
yours.
this. Yeah,
It doesn't
exactly.
belong to you. Actually, what's that quote where it's just like tradition is just peer pressure from dead guys?
Yeah, totally. And this is what we're going through as a society right now on a macrocosmic level too, is there's old narratives that people are trying to stick to, that it's okay to release it. We have a whole new set of challenges that we need to rise up and meet that are based on now, not the past, you know? So,
Yeah, totally.
and then there's another line. It says, oppressed by creeping vines. This is line number 6. He is anxious and perplexed. He says to himself, if I move, I will greatly regret it. Yet if he repents, remember the litai, and sets out, good fortune comes. So again, break free of the past view, have generosity and future hope. You know, like you may think that you're being oppressed by something that just doesn't, that's a ghost. You're being oppressed by a ghost, not something that's real anymore, right? That like difference and change is not a threat. I think that's what the theme that I was thinking about with this. And we may have memories of past trauma, right? That
exactly. That's what I was exactly what I was about to say.
Yeah.
Like being oppressed by a ghost. It's like, you know, ghosts leave marks. Like when they weren't ghosts, like they have like the power to do that too. So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, that purification vibe is coming back again. Like you could see almost repentance and purification as being like kind of like two similar things, when it's like repentance is like the submission to purification, right?
Yeah, totally.
Even if it's not about like, you know, like obviously no one did anything that is worth like you didn't like earn, you don't have to apologize for being traumatized, right? But like but
don't hang on to it, right? Like that,
right,
that
exactly,
could be the ghost too of Scorpio
but
3,
it's like,
right?
yeah,
We could
totally.
be oppressed by our old hurts and pains, not our just our old desires. It could be the old stories that are limiting beliefs, right? Where we talk about crushing that glass ceiling that Aquarius, maybe Saturn, may be bringing us, is saying, okay, those limiting beliefs need to be returned to the earth and castrated so that we can move
like there
forward.
are definitely some among them.
Right.
I do this practice every night where I use a piece of iron to like scrape my body. And this is actually an Aidan Wachter. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right. I think Aidan Wachter gave the blacksmith Corey Dickerson, who's Borealis Ironworks, this idea of like what to do with this object. Just to cite my source. So it's like just like a scraping practice, and I ask like anything that is ready to fall away, let it fall away freely. So there's no pressure to be like, oh, I'm letting go of like my core traumas, like, you know what I mean? Because I have to let that go. Like, no, you know what I mean? Like some things, like it in their time, it all has to happen in their time. No pressure from dead guys, no pressure from the self to be some kind of like transcended healed being. So I'm just asking like anything that is ready to fucking go, let it fall off, like just dead skin, like the carapaces of a bug, right? Just like let it fall off.
Yeah, that reminds me of I do planetary, I do like prayers, Orphic hymns to the planets each day as part of my morning rituals. And whenever I get to a Saturn or a Mars day, part of what I ask for is to be, you know, released from old form as gently as possible. You know,
yes,
just,
that's such a
you know?
yes. That was a hard. I had learned that prayer over time, like that was like the gentleness in the process is such an important.
There you go.
Because you can't avoid it. Like Mars isn't going to help you avoid Mars processes.
That's right. Just don't resist it. Remember, suffering comes from the resistance of that change, rather than, you know, dealing with the pain is human. But I really do think suffering can be a choice because we aren't accepting where we're at in life. It doesn't mean that you accept abuse. Like there's times when you have to take action to remove yourself from abusive situations, and that's your I don't know, dharma or whatever it would be. But when you come into alignment with what nature is bringing you and asking of you, that's when I think it's starting to work. I'm seeing some really great comments in the section in the chat box today, and I'm going to wrap this up. Abraham was asking about what translations I use of the I-Ching. I actually use multiple translations. My favorite is The Laws of Change by Jack M. Balkin, who is a Yale law professor. Very interesting interpretations in his book. I also like Hilary Barrett's book as well. I have an app on my phone called the I-Ching app where I can download multiple translation books, and I actually read about 5 or 6 different translations for every reading that I do to kind of distill it down into an essence. But the quotes I used today was from Jack Balkin's book. So check that one out. Really great. Highly recommend it. I-Ching's been great for teaching me how to respond to the changes of life, and just what is required of me, even if it's rest or even if it's withdrawing and not fighting something. It's been a great teacher for me, and I have a lot of appreciation for it. So Hawk, I think we're at the 3.5 hour mark.
We've done it.
We did it. This is amazing. This is an amazing marathon. Tanya's asking if we can see your cat. Can you put Lucian on screen here for a minute here?
We're trying to get my attention for exactly 3 hours. Now you don't want to.
Here's our beautiful kitty, little tuxedo cat.
Here he is. He's been incredibly terrible for 3 hours.
Look at his little face. I love him.
He got up on my kitchen counter for the first time ever, just being like, you will pay attention to me.
Right. What a little cutie. Well, I thank everybody for being here in the chat and for sticking with us today. Visit Hawk at studentofthestars.wordpress.com. Is that correct? Did I get it?
Mostly you can find me on Twitter. I'm Hawkstrology.
Hawkstrology on Twitter.
Hawkstrology, and my link tree will be linked there, so you can find my Patreon, my booking links for consultations. I'm a consulting astrologer booking for November.
There you go.
So
if you need help with this challenging energy, reach out to Hawk for a reading. And and come sign up for the Decans of Scorpio webinar, folks. I've really been excited about this series that I'm doing, and we go into super depth about the signs and the myths and the daimons and the tarot. I call it integrative divination. So we look at it through multiple lenses and try to distill it down to an essence. And you can, again, use the code Scorpio20 for 20% off until the 1st of November.
Tell us when that is again.
That's going to be the 13th of November at 1 p.m. Eastern Time.
13th. Okay.
Saturday.
Mark it on your calendars.
Mark it down. So yeah, and make sure you hit that like button. That's a great way to support the channel here. And if you'd like to make a material donation to the work I do, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com. There's a link in the description of this video. Thank you so much for being here.
Definitely deserves a coffee after this marathon session. I'm going to go buy me one as well.
We're going to be back. I'll be back next Friday at noon to talk about the new moon. I'm going to have my good friend CV Henriette, who is another Nightlight Astrology alum, coming to join me to talk about that. So make sure you tune in for that. And thanks again, Hawk, and thanks everybody for being here. I think that's what we've got for you today. Everybody, please hang in there and take care.
Bye.
Peace.